Right. So it's not that often that the case is within politics. When you come across somebody who is truly properly off their rocker, properly not on the same planet as the rest of us, as much as we take the mick out of an awful lot of politicians, but one that's properly not right, a real wrong 'un. And they invariably end up, of course, being on the right wing. And the more hard right they are, the more madder than a box of frogs they end up seeming to be. But boy, oh boy, if you haven't happened across Susan Hall, the Tory candidate for the London mayoralty yet, then this photograph sums it up without me having to say another word, really. She's come to really hate this picture. So it'd be a real shame if I just left it up there for a smidgen longer, wouldn't it? Just a tad longer. Look at her eyes. Look at a cat sizing up a sparrow. It's where your soul goes to die, isn't it? All right, that's enough of that. If only the photo was the maddest thing about her, but sadly it isn't. And I think it is particularly pertinent that on Laura Koonsberg's Tory Love Fest on the BBC just this morning, when she was speaking to James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary no less, who was once more proven not to live up to his name, because when she asked him about Hall's conduct this morning, he said, well, she's like most of us in the Tory party. Really? Well, that's insightful. Well, for a start, Hall was a big fan of Donald Trump, even to the point she had been retweeting the conspiracy theories going around that the 2020 presidential election was being stolen by Joe Biden. Trump is currently involved in 4 separate legal wrangles, both in terms of his claims regarding that election being stolen from him and the subsequent insurrection he is alleged to have instigated, taking classified documentation without permission as well, and is currently campaigning to become president again, mainly so he can pardon himself, because nothing quite shouts innocent like that, does it? But let's come to what is arguably the main example of her unsuitability to be in charge of anything more onerous than a stall at a car boot sale, frankly, where it has come to light that she's liked a tweet praising, of all people, Enoch Powell, that infamous bastion of tolerance, not captioned along with the words, "It's never too late to save your country." Well, what are you trying to say here then, Susan? This combination of this wording and Powell was once used as sloganeering by the BNP, but this is just one example of her social media likes, her conduct as compiled by Hope Not Hate, an organisation itself accused of being somewhat selective in its honesty and what it chooses to cover, given the treatment it's given to Jeremy Corbyn, but then it has now Labour peer Ruth Smith as a director. So as much as the organisation frankly embarrassed itself over Corbyn and ignores Starmer, it has no interest either in protecting Tories like Susan Hall. Ah, well, I'm sure she didn't mean to say it, some Tories might say, but she didn't just like this Powell/Save Your Country combo once. She did it twice on 2 separate occasions back in 2020. When you're invoking Enoch Powell in anything, it's clearly an anti-migrant and anti-multicultural attack. Powell is remembered for pretty much only one thing, that one speech, the Rivers of Blood speech, which is still to this day one of the most racially charged and offensive pieces of political oratory this country's ever seen. If Hall is showing she's been supportive of that, endorsed that, then anyone who isn't white in London should frankly be rather concerned about her getting elected anywhere, full stop. She is already on the London Assembly. Surely that's bad enough. It's not even the end of it, though, because the racial abuse has carried on, especially given that her chief opponent in this mayoralty race is, of course, the current Labour mayor, Sadiq Khan, himself of British Pakistani heritage. One such slur she's liked was from Katie Hopkins, of all people, who called Khan the nipple height mayor of Londonistan, which, no matter what you think of Khan, is just blatant dog whistle stuff. Hall herself doesn't really look any taller, if I'm honest. The racial slur element of her attacks on Khan, though, haven't stopped there either, having liked another tweet in relation to Khan's strategy to end domestic violence and female genital mutilation, which called him a rat and that he likes that sort of thing. Well, why is she able to get away with behaviour and conduct like this? I mean, with a lot of political candidates, we see it often with Labour ones as an example. They go on a deleting spree of their social media. Hiding mentions of Jeremy Corbyn is often seen as a surefire sign that a candidate is a wannabe careerist and a Starmerite. But Hall hasn't done that. For the Tories, this is their base that they're appealing to. This is a badge of honour. And all that kind of thinking is the only way I can interpret that. But equally, there should be a standard for people to not be in positions of elected privilege being able to get away with such crass, insulting, offensive and irresponsible behaviour. There has to be a limit, a standard. Free speech is one thing, But that has to come with a sense of responsibility. And elected officials, as Hall is, as I said, she's on the London Assembly, they're supposed to be held to a higher standard than all of the rest of us. They're supposed to be the ones setting the example. So why is she still in office? Why is she still a candidate? Why is she not being suspended now that this behaviour has come to light? Why is the Foreign Secretary literally defending her on the BBC this morning? He also talked about getting London back in light of having Hall's Enoch Powell comments put to him. Well, in light of that, getting London back for whom? You're a black man yourself, cleverly. Do you think this is a smart thing to be saying? Hall's comments are insulting and nothing short of racist, in my opinion, and I can imagine a great deal of people in London, and certainly the rest of the country as well, will feel the same way, given the multicultural nature of that city. Many people will be terrified by this kind of language. And goodness knows Khan may not be popular. He will have upset a lot of people. He is, in his own way, a fairly centrist, Starmery kind of a bloke. The way he has handled ULEZ, as much as the scheme is necessary and as much as we want clean air and as much as the media have misled on that, has hurt him. But given the Tories instigated that plan as well and actually wanted to charge Londoners a lot more before Grant Shapps got conveniently shuffled off again somewhere else he could do some more damage, it's pretty sick that Hall can campaign on undoing ULEZ as she's doing. It was her party that brought this concept into being. What price will you pay for installing her over Khan, though, when all is said and done? Is this the sort of person you want in charge of London? Because the Tories think she's like most of them, and that should worry an awful lot of people. What do you think of Susan Hall? Are you in favour of her? Is ULEZ being binned a bigger issue than racism for you? Or are you like me and horrified at the prospect, even if you're not necessarily Sadiq Khan's biggest fan? What do candidates like Hall say about the Tory party these days? Have they really sunk so low? Have they really got that little to choose from that this is mainstream and who they're still prepared to back despite the claims and the things that they've endorsed or said or liked? Because that's a reflection of them directly. Nobody forced them to do that. That all happened at a time when they weren't electioneering. This is who they are. Have your say in the comments below and be part of the conversation on this. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the local elections earlier this year saw the Tories stand a lot of bigots and racists, and so it really does seem to imply they're the only people they've got left who stand for them, that are prepared to. They're in end of days territory, as they seem to be. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.
Right, so Keir Starmer is to lies what day is to night. The sun is to the moon what Tom is to Jerry. He lies like a rug. But surprisingly, for a change, it isn't alternative media solely calling him out for his latest example of what would appear to be some rather rank dishonesty, which I'll come on to presently. But it's been made all the more surprising given the Tories are dominating the headlines at the moment with talk of their meat taxes and their 7 bins and coordinated industrial action by junior doctors and consultants as they continue to fail our health service, as what many have been reporting on as a sensible Brexit position to take for Starmer. His review or his rewrite of the deal has got some attention from them. His desire to get a better deal than we have now on trade, on national security, but absolutely no chance, you understand, of entering into the single market again or into a new customs union. So on the face of it, he was appealing to businesses and business leaders with this, who have complained about how bad the Brexit deal has been for them, a deal Starmer incidentally voted for. So there's the first bit of dishonesty to this story, just a snifter of it though, there's more to come. It'll be bitterly disappointing to those Remainers, the FBPE hashtaggers, follow back pro-EU as that stands for, who have ardently supported him even while Corbyn was still leader, calling Corbyn a secret leaver and hailing Starmer as the second coming for EU membership. Well, it doesn't go nearly far enough for most of them. But of course, some are determined that he must be lying in order to deliver this, and we should support him because secretly he'll take us back in. But he doesn't want to be appealing to them now. He wants to be appealing to the Brexit leavers at this point. This is all Starmer's grand plan, according to them. Anyway, Labour, as we know, lost the red wall over their position on Brexit going into the 2019 general election, largely a situation Starmer, the then shadow Brexit secretary, had himself set up, calling for a second referendum with Remain as an option at the 2018 Labour conference and destroying his own party's electoral chances. His faction failed to regain power or control of the party in 2017, they found something to hurt Corbyn electorally in 2019, though. And so their little plot worked. And we know it was such a plot because Starmer dropped the topic of Brexit like a hot potato from the time he became Brexit leader, up until now, really. So there's even more dishonesty in relation to all of this story. You know, one thing we don't talk about so much is what Corbyn's position actually was in 2018 before Starmer's act of sabotage. He was sitting on the fence, is what most people thought. He wasn't getting a great deal of coverage on such things either. The media far more fixated on destroying him in the interests of the establishment class, not really listening to what he had to say on stuff. However, not being in power, and with the Tories at each other's throats and completely divided, it seemed an unhelpful thing to come out with a bespoke position of Labour's own at that point. The Tories were being given enough rope to hang themselves, so to speak. So Starmer coming out onto stage with a Labour position subsequently ended up becoming an act of sabotage. But Corbyn did say the kind of deal his party would support should the Tories come forward with it. If you deliver a deal that includes a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, if you protect jobs, people's rights at work and environmental and consumer standards, then we will support that sensible deal. That's what Corbyn said. That was basically Labour's actual true position. But sure, to some he was a rabid leaver and they won't hear a word of it. He put forward a sensible option with widespread support that ended the years of debate we were all sick and tired of for the Tories to deliver, and they failed utterly to do so. So that's what brings us up to the here and now anyway. But for all of Starmer's self-serving switching between Remain being on a ballot and delivering on the Brexit deal he voted through but now wants to tweak, there has, courtesy of Sky, been a bit of footage leaked out from 2020 as it happens, a trip to Canada that Starmer had taken that might imply the FBPE crowd hoping for another Starmer lie on Europe, a lie regarding possibly taking us back in as a consequence, could well be onto something, and that rejoining might actually be on the cards for Team Keith. So this story is a case that Starmer was in Montreal in 2020 at a conference of supposedly centre-left leaders. So frankly, what Starmer was doing there, I've no idea. But it was 2020, still early days into his own premiership. People were still giving him the benefit of the doubt. It was September 2020. And he was sat there on stage with the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store, and he was asked a question on relations with the EU by a certain John McTernan, who comes up in conversation on some of my videos now and again. And if you aren't aware of the guy by now, he was a former advisor to Tony Blair. He was the strategist that saw Labour lose Scotland, and also the Australian Labour Party of Julia Gillard lose as well. The fact he was there, though, and got to ask Starmer a question no less, would, if this had been reported at the time, been a klaxon warning to the left. But this was Starmer's response, which is relevant in terms of what he's saying about his plans for a future relationship with the EU. He said, most of the conflict with the UK being outside of the UK, he meant EU, fluffed his words, arises insofar as the UK wants to diverge and do different things to the rest of our EU partners. Obviously, the more we share values, the more we share a future together, the less the conflict. And actually, different ways of solving problems become available. Actually, we don't want to diverge. We don't want to lower standards. We don't want to rip up environmental standards, working standards for people that work, food standards, and all the rest of it. So suddenly, you're in a space where, notwithstanding the obvious fact that we're outside the EU and not in the EEA, the European Economic Area, there's a lot more common ground than you might think. So Starmer is saying there that most of the conflict we have with the EU regarding the UK now being outside of it is down to the UK wanting to diverge from the EU further. Certainly the mentality and the narrative of a lot of Tories. And he's saying that he and his party don't want to diverge, don't want to lower standards, and implies the common ground is there for that to happen. Sounds very much like he does want a closer relationship with the EU, or certainly did back in 2020, before much of the damage from Brexit, it can be argued, was really being felt. We now are definitely feeling it. The food shortages, the cost of living crisis, the trade barriers, the screw-ups in relation to Northern Ireland being out but still in. So if Keir Starmer felt like he said before we became embroiled in all of that mess, by how much is he seeking to not diverge further from the EU now, in which case? For the record, I voted Remain. I didn't trust the Tories one iota to deliver anything in our interests, and as much as the EU was imperfect in a great many ways, they provided a check on our government, which I felt was very, very important. But if Starmer is plotting a much closer future relationship with the EU based on past comments he's made on video, because there's always a receipt when it comes to him, social media always keeps a record after all, he gets caught out time after time for being a big fat fibber. Who would trust him not to, in light of this video footage Sky have unearthed, not seek a closer relationship with the EU after all? That could even include a single market and customs union. Maybe that's something you would quite like after all. It would certainly solve a lot of problems currently being felt, and certainly a great deal of those FBPE crowd would love to see it. My issue is, if that is actually what he is planning, why is it he always has to take the road of dishonesty in order to promote anything or do anything? Why is it he cannot ever make the case for something, a positive case? He is just an overarching aura of negativity at all times. And the answer to that is he's running scared of the right-wing media. He's been licking Rupert Murdoch's boots for months. His retirement will be coming as a blow to Team Keith, I'm sure. And many of those publications were Brexit supporting. Equally, he wants the red wall seats Labour lost back, who went Tory because they wanted to leave the EU. They voted for Brexit. Many blaming Europe for their hardships. I would hope many had learnt now it was really the Tories, since things have only become worse, and that rancid party is the cause of so much damage in this country. But when Starmer can't be straight with us about his true intentions on anything, seemingly ever, can you really believe him when he says no to the single market and customs union? And even if he really truly means it in his heart of hearts, assuming he has one, the EU will want an incentive to reopen talks of that magnitude that go far beyond the planned 2025 review. So what would he offer though, in which case? And why is that not being asked or spoken about? What do you think? Is this another example of Starmer pulling a fast one on us? Has he been plotting to go back in all this time and now is his chance? Or is it all a cynical ploy just for votes? Would you want to go back in? Have you changed your mind? And if so, what do you think Starmer should be saying? Or are you still happy we left? And if that is the case, what do you make of Starmer in light of this story? Do let me know in the comments below and be part of the conversation on this. I always take an interest. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please do like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the Tories are running scared of their own Brexit inquiry. Now, I can't imagine why that would be. And does this provide Starmer with incentive for what he's saying now? Well, I don't know. You tell me. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Sharon Graham's Unite are once again doing their best Keir Starmer impression by mixing what appears to be a combination of authoritarianism and paranoia as legal proceedings begin against them. And nothing quite demonstrates that, like taking as much in the way of union member subs as they can possibly muster to throw at this problem and build their defence, because money would appear is suddenly no object in order to fight this particular case and protect Team Sharon, together with decimating hers and her union's reputation in the process, acting the way they have. So what's this all about then, Damo? Well, this concerns the treatment of a chap called Brendan Ogle. And it's bitterly ironic that we're talking about a chap here who works for Unite, because when your employer is treating you badly and you're a unionised sort of chap and you kind of expect to be able to go to your union and complain to them about how you're being treated, but when your union is your employer, well, what do you do then? Brendan Ogle, if you're not familiar with him, is probably the most significant trade unionist, full stop, to come out of Ireland in the last 20 years. He was Unite's main man there, the Unite senior officer for the Republic of Ireland, and had been since 2014. So he basically runs Unite in Ireland. He's also the main spokesman and national coordinator of the Right to Water campaign in Ireland to bring Irish water. For a long time, water quality, supply and sanitation has been a huge issue there. Sound familiar? Long before ours ended up worse, thanks to the Tories though, and bring it up to proper EU standard. This is a guy with a reputation for going straight to the management of employees getting a raw deal, and where other trade unionists might seek more of a compromise or an easier path, he won't. He won't stand for people getting a bad deal, and it seems that goes for himself too. You see, Ogle had to take some time off, 2 years as it was, because he was battling cancer. It's been quite the battle for him. Maximum doses of chemotherapy and radiation. The man lost 4.5 stone, but he finally returned to work in July of last year, having beaten it, being cleared to do so by the union on a phased initial return. But if he expected to return to his senior union role, he was in for a shock, because in the meantime, Sharon Graham had become General Secretary. Unite attempted to force Ogle into a lesser post, one that would have meant a 100-mile daily commute for someone who had just narrowly avoided a terminal cancer diagnosis. He was also told he was no longer involved in the Right to Water campaign, which he'd been leading from the very beginning, of which nobody else was qualified to replace him over. Leaving the whole thing in complete disarray, including regarding a Unite-funded referendum on public ownership of water. He has refused the lesser role, leaving him somewhat in limbo at this moment in time, his former responsibilities not getting done, for which he is getting the blame, but for which he is also powerless to do anything about, barred from performing those duties as he is. But why has the union done this? Who are you supposed to go to when your own bad employer is literally a trade union? What we're seeing here is effectively fire and rehire, after all, isn't it? Ogle has also been prevented from accessing union representation, so he's been denied the basic rights of any trade union member. He's been told by the Dublin office of Unite that a new strategy is being put in place for Ireland that didn't include him. Why, though? We don't know, because Unite refuses to comment on staffing matters. Others are asking questions as to where he is, so widely respected and well known as Brendan is within the movement, so it beggars belief Unite are picking a fight here with a man who's earned the respect of so many trade unionists over his decades-long service to them and is widely credited with transforming the reputation of Unite in Ireland. Well, it looks like Sharon Graham is earning her own reputation in Ireland too now. It isn't a good one. In fact, so appalled are so many there that Unite branches across the country convened meetings in order to pass votes of solidarity in Ogle, and there was even talk of Unite in Ireland completely disaffiliating from Sharon Graham's London-centric organisation because of how he was being treated at one point. Graham's reputation in Ireland had already got so bad that she'd been due to visit Dublin shortly after all this blew up, and for reasons that have still never been made clear, though the optics imply it's abundantly obvious, she cancelled, rearranging her plans to a decidedly more low-key event subsequently. Brendan's story isn't the only one similar that I've heard, but fundamentally anyone in a leading role within Unite who didn't support Sharon Graham for General Secretary has been targeted for removal. Well, just as he's done for the last 20-odd years, Brendan Ogle isn't about to let a bad employer get the better of him, even when it's his own. And having submitted a tribunal complaint with the Workplace Relations Commission, he's taking Unite to court now too, with the defendants not just being Unite the Union itself, but Sharon Graham is a separately named defendant, as is her ally Tony Woodhouse. They've been served a plenary summons, the first stage of legal proceedings, by the Irish High Court under the Irish Defamation Act of 2009, in relation to just that, defamation. Claims he was defamed by Graham and Woodhouse on two separate occasions in Ireland in September last year and May of this year. So not only had the Graham Unite machine treated Ogle appallingly as an employee of the union, but they've apparently been slandering him too, and Ogle clearly thinks he's got evidence to prove it. It would appear that Sharon Graham is pretty bothered about this legal action as well, because it would appear that no amount of members' dues is too great to employ legal protection for her, what amounts to herself and her mate, that is. You see, like many large organisations, especially ones who have a lot of legal business, as you would imagine a large trade union would, they pay favoured legal firms a retainer, so their services are on hand when they need them, and Unite in Ireland have used a firm called Turner Hamilton for more than 30 years now, and they are paid a retainer for their services. But the defendants in this case have chosen not to use them. They've decided to use a firm called Dentons instead. Dentons refer to themselves as the largest global law firm, and their earnings seem to imply their price tags match that boast, with annual revenues reported of some $3 billion. And you have to ask yourself here, why aren't Turners good enough for Sharon Graham when they've been good enough for every other ordinary member's dispute for the last 30 years? What makes you so special, Sharon, that you deserve special treatment? And why should members' dues be spent in such a way when what would appear to be a perfectly competent law firm is good enough to have been on your retainer for decades for everybody else? Does she honestly have no idea how this looks to people both in her union and outside of it? Especially in light of the fact Ogle himself can't even access a bloody basic right like a union rep at the same time. We have a union led by someone who is blatantly too close to the Starmer regime, despite what she says, because what she does screams far more loudly. We have someone who engages in the worst employer practices against people who didn't back her for General Secretary, even fire and rehire, as demonstrated by the actions Brendan Ogle has taken to the tribunal, and has suffered under, that's led to that. And also at the High Court, not to mention the fact again, she did this to a guy who had just won the fight of his life against a disease that almost killed him. Wanted to make him do a daily 100-mile commute straight after, once he returned for work, for what was in fact a demotion, making her just as factional as Starmer and just as petty, and frankly it's cruel. The harm to the reputation of Unite being committed by the current leadership seems to me to be right up there with Labour now, and Sharon Graham may as well be Keir Starmer in a skirt. Perhaps she should put herself on notice this time. Solidarity and best wishes to you, Brendan Ogle and his family. The guy's been a fighter all his life. He's not done yet. I wish him all the best, and we'll be following these proceedings with interest. But what do you think, though? Is Unite being run into the floor, or are you still a fan of Sharon Graham, despite what is going on in Ireland? Is this fair use of membership money and assembling her legal defence? Why should she get better representation than any other Unite member, though? Do let me know how you feel about this. Leave a comment and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. Hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Sharon Graham has shown some solidarity elsewhere, if not in Ireland, by advocating for her union to pass a motion of solidarity with Ukraine at the recent TUC conference, despite the Ukrainian government using the cover of war to water down workers' rights. She really does have a lot of explaining to do on all manner of things at this point, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so it's not really a secret that this channel has a bit of a dim view of Keir Starmer, put it nicely. I think most regular viewers have probably cottoned onto this by now, from his political naivety, which requires him to have Blairite handlers, effectively operating him like a glove puppet. Frankly, if he were any more clueless, he'd need watering twice a week. He takes himself far too seriously, when I certainly don't. A man with all the charisma of topsoil and all the authoritative speaking skills of an anxiety-ridden supply teacher. But whilst this human form of Zolbadem may be a rubbish politician and be in possession of a voice that has all the soothing qualities of nappy rash, his descent into further and further right-wing ideology and thinking and policy has now hit the point where he's basically now on the subject of immigration decided fascism is the only way to out-nasty the Tories. He once said he wanted to make the moral case for immigration. Now he wants to brand families knowing their kids are coming on the next small boat as terrorists. This all came out yesterday morning when Starmer went on Trevor Phillips' show on Sky. Phillips himself, a formerly suspended Labour member accused of Islamophobia, quietly readmitted because you only seem to get expelled over anti-Semitism, it seems, these days, where Phillips said to Starmer, "I want to be clear whether you mean what you say. Another possibility, which is in legislation, terrorism legislation, is that someone who knows that an active people smuggling is about to take place will be subject to Section 38B and is required to report that to the police or face 5 years in jail, which would apply if what you say, what you mean, for example, families of children who come across on those boats, who know they are going to arrive on those boats, do you actually mean to treat them as terrorists or not?" Now you can read Philip's question in a couple of different ways, actually. I've watched the clip a few times, and on one hand you could argue he's teeing Starmer up to give the answer he wants him to give, or you could read it as giving Starmer the chance to make an exception to labelling those aware of a boat crossing coming as terrorists. I would like to think, given we are talking about children in this example, it is the latter, that he was giving Starmer the chance to give a human response. Bearing in mind Starmer is himself a father, bearing in mind he's supposed to be a former human rights barrister. Starmer's response, however, was, "Well, what I've said, Trevor, is that we need to put them in the bracket of terrorists, and that's why I want it to be used to smash those operations." We could be talking about parents who have come ahead of time and sent with their kids after. Those parents would be labelled terrorists. The definition of a terrorist is a person who uses unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. So explain to me how knowing your kid is coming on the next small boat fits that definition. Trevor Phillips quoted from the Terrorism Act of 2000, Section 38B, which simply states it as an offence for someone to not inform the police if they know or have information they believe might be of material assistance to the police to not disclose it, but this relates to acts of terrorism. Phillips talks in terms of people smuggling, but that isn't mentioned in Section 38B. It would only come under Section 38B of the Terrorism Act if Starmer amends it to include people trafficking as an act of terrorism, which, as the aforementioned definitely shows, it doesn't. These are people trying to enter the country to claim asylum. It has to be also remembered that under the Human Rights Act there is no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker, since they can claim asylum once on British soil, and any and all crimes of that led up to the entering of this country illegally are completely nullified at that point. This is why talk of illegal entry to this country to seek asylum is complete bunkum, because you cannot illegally claim asylum. If no crime is committed, then under the Human Rights Act, how can anyone with prior knowledge of this be prosecuted for terrorism? The minute people land and claim asylum, all is forgiven in effect. How will you police that? You're nicked for terrorism because you know your boat is coming. Oh, it's landed, is it? Oh well, handcuffs off, lads. Or are they still chargeable with a terrorism offence even as the person on the boat might, as an example, succeed in making their asylum claim? Who else is going to be a terrorist then, Keith? Well, the people smugglers themselves. Well, they are absolutely criminals, no doubt about that. But sending people across the channel in a boat to hopefully not drown and start a new life, while bleeding them dry of every worldly good they might own, isn't quite the same as bombing London in the name of Al-Qaeda, is it? Starmer opining on terrorism as a Zionist without qualification is also a little bit rich, because making up new terrorism definitions under bonkers new border legislation isn't the same as an apartheid state you consistently turn a blind eye to, say, gunning down kids in the street, or firing off tear gas grenades into crowds, or stealing homes while the family who lived there happened to be attending a funeral. Things like that, all in the name of religious and political superiority, because that's a lot closer to that definition of terrorism, isn't it? But then this is the state of Israel we're talking about now, and Starmer would probably just refuse to discuss it. Such is his arrogance, but also his hypocrisy. Of course, his supporters are denying he ever even said this on TV, but having literally gone out on live TV and spoken to Trevor Phillips, he very much did say it. I have seen people arguing all day he meant the people traffickers only, not the family, but that isn't true. And if you read section 38B, add in what Phillips put to Starmer, the words he used about not reporting a boat crossing as a terrorist offence, and Starmer not denying it, in fact clarifying what Phillips said was right, and you have a pretty emphatic affirmation there. All Starmer is doing here is fishing for right-wing votes, hoping to outflank the Tories to the right of them on small boat crossings, even as the Tories are just about as right-wing as you can get on that issue right now, short of shooting people down as they try to land. What that means is there's a gulf on the left for someone with some common sense to fill. A safe, legal asylum route that, instead of wasting money on a failing war against people traffickers, would instead put them out of business whilst ensuring no more people drown in the Channel. A returns agreement negotiated with the EU, so we take a fair share of people here and aren't subject to having to home every single person coming here, as we still currently are, with the Tories instead fixated on deportations. Stop criminalising people who may have fled all manner of war or persecution, may have escaped actual terrorists and deserve help, not to be labelled as terrorists themselves or their families who are already here. What Starmer is proposing is fascistic and dangerous and won't change a damn thing, as desperate people prepared to risk their lives to come here, for whatever their reasons may be, will still do it. You can't stop all the votes for as long as you incentivise people to make money from doing it. If you cut them off financially, though, provide a legal, safe asylum route, treat these people with dignity and respect instead, well, that's how you fix this issue completely once and for all. And it won't be fixed any other way. If only there was somebody making this, on a common sense, obvious, frankly, position their own. Oh, wait, there is. It's the Green Party. Tell me your thoughts on this, though. Do you agree with Starmer, or is one fascist policy short of going around in military uniform from now on? What do you make of labelling not just the people traffickers, but families of those being trafficked, if they're in the know, as confirmed to Trevor Phillips as terrorists by a future Labour government? Is this an abuse of terrorism law? Is this what it was intended to be used for? Do have your say in the comments below, and I'll be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where all these newly minted victims of terrorism are Starmers, the people actually coming to claim asylum, the only ones not actually being termed terrorists in all of this, will still be banged up on a prison ship for their efforts, as Starmer reckons he has no choice but to use the Tory Legionella barge. But, as always in politics, it is always a choice. I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so, Liz Truss. Liz Truss! Why won't she just go away now? Perhaps some of you have put this on and thought, oh God, no, it's him again, and thought the same about me a time or two. Why won't I go away? But at least, come on, I tried to make some effort to know what I'm talking about here. Truss could claim to be from Mars, stick 2 pencils up her nose and say Whittle, and South West Norfolk would still bloody elect her. That lettuce that lasted longer than her premiership has now surely long since expired, but it's a valid question, is it not? Why is she still even a thing after all the damage she did? £30 billion of our money gone down the pan because she's an economic idiot. So many Tories stepping down ahead of the next election. So many of them stepping away because they figure their party is doomed and is set to disappear into oblivion. But not Liz. No, not her. She's standing again. And she's been bizarrely re-endorsed by her local Conservative Party and, of course, permitted to stand by the National Party by effect when you would imagine if they want an ounce of economic credibility at all. After 13 years of failing the country, any just the slightest bit of credibility going forward into the next election, they'd have binned her off faster than Starmer suspending Corbyn. Perhaps they're that hard up for candidates they've got no choice anymore. But what an accusation Labour have got going into the next election when whatever Sunak might say about his party being the better one to be in charge of the economy, Starmer could just turn around and say no party that has allowed Liz Truss to stand again after the money she lost, money the Tory stole from all of us, could be, and we think about it, I believe, could be trusted with the nation's purse strings. £30 billion gone. When we lose money, if we were to be robbed, for example, or mugged in the street, if the perpetrator got away with it, how do we get our money back then? Quite often we don't, do we? We have to carry on regardless. Carry on with our lives. We have to make that money up somewhere else along the line. Take that missing cash from somewhere else if it was important. If we needed it for a specific something, but Truss losing £30 billion, literally half of the Treasury's fiscal black hole, well, who's paying for that then? It's going to be us again, isn't it? Still us. Why is Truss not somehow responsible for any part of this? Some kind of criminal negligence here. Parliamentary privilege, of course, protects her, but it is nuts that anyone should trust the economy with the Tories when she will remain in their ranks. Well, ever, in my opinion, actually, never mind Liz Truss. But after this, that should be nailed on, especially when Sunak has failed to really do anything to address it, or completely unelected, mandateless PM as he is, doing nothing to fix the finances, except he's just simply there to cement his place in the history books, having become PM by virtue of that. He's hardly done anything of note except preside over scandal after all, and making 5 pledges he can't keep. The word Tory comes from an Irish word for thief. Never has a truer sentiment been made after Truss. Any normal person, you would think, anyone who had been such an abject calamity in government would frankly count their lucky stars just to fade gently into obscurity afterwards. But Liz Truss, she is not normal. She's not contrite, she's not remorseful, she's not the slightest bit repentant. She has, in fact, just given a speech, where not only has she blamed anyone but herself for what happened during her short stint as Prime Minister, but she's still advocating for the same policies that did so much damage. In a speech she gave to the Institute for Government, a think tank which claims to improve government effectiveness, so platforming Truss to speak on economics is frankly scraping the bottom of the barrel in their quest for credibility, discovering there is in fact a basement juice-ed barrel and digging on even deeper. It's the last thing on the planet they should have considered, arguably, but oh well, how sad, never mind, it was nice knowing you. Not. But everything that poured out of Truss's mouth was just the most insane, dangerous, counterintuitive nonsense, still defending everything that did the damage before, that she did before. The first thing she said as she began her speech, her icebreaker to relax the room, was to say, well, she's having a more relaxing September this year than she did last year. Well, isn't that nice for you, Liz? I don't think we asked how you were doing. Many of us really don't care, frankly. I imagine an awful lot of those people will be mortgage payers, along with a lot of former mortgage payers, as a lot of people will have lost their homes thanks to the interest rates soaring. But you have your little joke. So who is to blame for everything going wrong, according to you, in your lettuce world then, Liz? Well, it's the left. You might be surprised to hear. Yes, rotten lefties have broken the country. It's not her fault. Who knew? She reckons since the Cold War was won, so we're back in the 80s, Thatcher, the left took over, apparently. What? What? You're saying Thatcher was a lefty then? Major? Blair? Definitely not Blair. What have you been smoking? But she had her explanation. It was word salad, though. She said Tories took their eye off the ball after Thatcher's monetary reforms. OK, so not Thatcher then. The free market economists all jumped on the private sector gravy train. Well, of course they did. Greed is their god. They got their way. The country was being run in their favour and they were set to cash in. But she thinks economic institutions and think tanks as a result got taken over by the left. Did they? The Bank of England, those famous lefties. Tufton Street think tanks, usually the same people writing your speeches, Liz. They're suddenly lefties too. Taxpayers Alliance, Institute for Economic Affairs, lefties are they? You're flaming nuts. She wasn't finished though. She spoke of demand management creeping back in. Well, what the hell is that? I had to look that up. It's just managing demand for stuff, as it happens. It literally is what it says on the tin. That's surely the government's job anyway then. So why is it an issue that it crept back in? Surely that just means you're doing what you're supposed to do. Ignoring need was government policy back in the day, was it? Well, growing up through Thatcher, I can kind of see that. But complaining about it is very weird, especially when it's your team. She also then trotted out the absolutely scripted. She doesn't have a Scooby about what she is saying creeping in of neo-Keynesian monetary policy. Who wrote that one for you, Liz? One of your famous lefty think tanks, I fancy. In other words, Liz is apparently under the impression the free market has had its freedoms restricted. If only that were true. We might not have found ourselves being scalped by privatised industries today, would we? Doing what they like, getting bailed out by the government in the form of energy bill top-ups because God forbid the ideology be called failing. Well, she's blaming her own party for letting that happen, as it happens. Now, let's bear in mind here, Truss has been a minister, incredibly, bizarrely, non-stop, up until her fall from grace as PM last year, since 2012. She's been Under-Secretary of State for Childcare and Education, Environment Secretary, Lord Chancellor, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, International Trade Secretary, Minister for Women and Equalities, and Foreign Secretary, all before becoming Prime Minister. So you've been letting the left take over yourself in this multitude of different departments of yours then, or were you the exception? Diversity, wokery, politics, she called it. Well, she's said woke now, so any scant credibility went out the window at that point. Being informed is never a bad thing, though I suppose you build a career out of being the complete opposite, as your speech showed in bundles. The energy price cap was woke as well. That was woke lefty nonsense, apparently. Evidence the left was running the show, apparently. The climate change target of 2050, that's too woke for Liz, but not for the planet. Not that I believe she lives on the same one as the rest of us. Right, so we've established Liz thinks everything has become more left-wing, despite very much the opposite being true. We live in a country now where even the supposed left-wing Labour Party is to the right of the Tories on certain things, like even immigration now. But entertain us further, Liz. What are the answers? How do we fix it? Do tell us, you economic genius, you. Well, everything that flushed the country down the loo and saw Truss preside over that £30 billion theft from the public purse for her stupidity, that's actually the answer to everything. Yeah, she's learned absolutely nothing from her disaster politics at all. Her economics is still sound. You'll love this list of solutions, folks. Truss is advocating now for more tax cuts. The very same thing that cost so much last year, because when you cut tax, you have to cut spending too, and when Truss couldn't do that, so her tax cuts ended up, as a result, unfunded. Whee! Went the inflation and the interest rates and people's mortgages with it. But no, we need more of those, according to Liz. We'll slash benefits as well. That'll help pay for that. Never mind people can't survive now that they've been cut to the bone already over 13 years. Tax cuts for the rich must be paid for off the backs of the poorest, many of whom will be in work, of course. Let's keep people in work longer by working more of them to death, by raising that retirement age again. Let's put fracking back on the agenda. Ditch the windfall tax on those poor struggling energy companies. Bless them. Delay all of our net zero commitments. I will remind you, she was Environment Secretary at one point. Was she clapping at the sight of sewage going into rivers? Because based off these policy suggestions, that would be entirely believable and in keeping with her ethos. We need to keep using fossil fuels too by delaying replacement of gas and oil boilers and obviously diverge further from the EU because the hard right batshitterati brigade in the Tory party, like Truss, insists that treating Europe like they're the political equivalent of the Black Death is a vote winner and what is best for the country. To say Truss is completely bonkers is an understatement. She's deranged to the point she's dangerous, in my opinion. For one thing, there will be those in the Tory party who will absolutely approve of all of this. It won't be Sunak's bunch, who she reckons is... Sunak, incidentally, she reckons is worse than she would have been. High standard, though, Liz, really. But come an election, she could cause splits. So politically, it'd make sense for Sunak to pin her blocker standing, at the very least block her ridiculous honours list, and remind her of where she stands now and put her in her place a bit. But he won't do that, though, and a divided Tory party is only going to benefit Starmer more, and the bigger the majority he wins, the worse it will be for all of us with the authoritarian streak he keeps displaying. Worse, it's not just some Tories that back her, but various hate rags and their journalists do too, plus some of those so lefty think tanks. Funnily enough, they back her too, along with various assorted lobby groups. The rabidly pro-Brexit Bruges group, for example, remarked to a video clip of Truss saying, oh, well, the interest rates were going up anyway. What? 13 times over, though? Really, Liz? With the comment, she's right, again. If Liz Truss is the answer, Bruges group, you're asking the wrong questions. She's everything that has gone wrong in this country, rolled up in one clueless airhead. She's the economic and environmental equivalent of Harold Shipman and is now being rewarded for it. Rewarded for failure by being platformed as someone entitled to speak out, indulging herself political and economic in political and economic commentary as she has, and she has absolutely no business whatsoever ever saying a word ever again on these things after what she did. She has a majority of more than 25,000 in southwest Norfolk. For God's sake, vote her out and help make this country a safer place to live in. What do you good people reckon, though? Is her career the equivalent of a can of busted biscuits now, or are we doomed to see her return to government at some point? Will we ever be got rid of her? Surely you can't agree with her madness, but if you do, please help me understand why you would think so, because I really can't see it. Whatever your thoughts on this, please do add them in the comments and be part of the conversation there. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. And if you've got this far, you don't want to miss out on more of it, do you? Meanwhile, here's a vid recommendation where Liz Truss not long ago was blaming woke lefty bankers for her downfall too. Well, she has been on the blame game for quite some time now. A period of silence we never seem to have ever had from her would be welcome at this point, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer, Keith. If you've had the epiphany to believe the Brexit bill now needs rewriting and the EU will happily renegotiate it with you, then do answer the question as to why you chose to vote for it in the beginning. Boris Johnson's oven-ready deal. You voted for it. You didn't have to. Would have passed anyway. But now apparently there's something wrong with it, in which case, why did you ever support it? You didn't have to put your name to it, former Mr. Remain as you were. Johnson had won a majority, and that was your doing as well, to an extent, wasn't it? Corbyn should have sacked you on the spot as shadow Brexit secretary that day in the 2018 Labour Party conference when you advocated for a second referendum on Brexit. Killed Labour as a party that refused to take a side in the Brexit debate, as the Tories had more than enough rope to hang themselves with over the issue. You decided to call Labour for Remain. Corbyn's weakness was that he let you. Funny that you've ignored the issue by and large ever since becoming leader, though, isn't it? Whilst also now saying no to a second referendum and now being determined to make Brexit work. Except you're not, because you're now wanting to tinker with it and rewrite bits of it. So that was a bit of a fib as well, wasn't it? It's just one reason now, and a hell of a long list of examples of why nobody should trust a damn word Keir Starmer ever has to say about anything, really. He should be telling a lot of people, those capable of looking past Corbyn at least, that you can't be trusted on anything you say, and that everything you've done from then till now has only ever been about one thing: what is best for you at any one given time. I wonder how many of those social media users with FBPE in their handles feel rather daft for backing him in the belief he'd undo anything. He still thinks he's got your votes in the bag, by the way, even as he acts in order to chase Tory voters now, because he thinks you're just going to vote for him anyway to get the Tories out. Maybe you should have a long, hard think about that. There are so many numerous issues with the Brexit deal that can't be solved with tinkering, with some kind of a review, as Starmer's team are calling it, and fundamentally that is all Starmer is promising, because he's still ruling out rejoining the single market or renegotiating a new customs union. He still wants better trade terms, perhaps, but frankly he's offering them nothing in order to get them then, unless of course he's lying to us all again and there's more going on behind the scenes than we know of. Who'd put that past him? Now, some of his supporters will claim that is exactly what he is doing. He's lying about it. He'll take us back into Europe, really. Vote for liar Keith. What? If you're setting yourself up, if you're setting out your stall for supporting him because he's dishonest, boy, have you got issues, sunshine. You won't be getting my vote for that. Of course, the right-wing press will say exactly the same thing as a reason to not vote for Starmer. Not that he's a liar, but that he will take us back into Europe. They're right-wing. They back the Tories usually, and they're liars too. And so they always back liars. Nothing new, in which case. So lying isn't going to put them off. But, going back into Europe? No, can't have that. Before anyone gets too excited about this prospect one way or another, though, we have to remember the deal is done. Signed, agreed, and in place. There is zero incentive for the EU to reopen any of it, unless they figure there's some benefit to them that makes it worthwhile. All Starmer is capable of doing, therefore, if he indeed plans on keeping his word on any of this, so let's assume, for argument's sake, that he is to try and get some kind of benefit back from the EU so he can say he's got one over on the Tories. This isn't going to be in any way a meaningful change, even if he gets one then. Let's be charitable for one moment and say the EU agreed to reopen this can of worms again. Labour has been chatting away with its European equivalents informally for ages. They do this all the time. We know this. Who knows what might have been said in relation specifically to Brexit, though? What could he get? Well, our trade with the EU right now is completely pants, as we know. Long queues to Dover and long reams of red tape going with it. Rather than address that, the Tories have sought trade deals elsewhere, like their tiny CPTPP deal, which actually only gave us new trade markets in Malaysia and Brunei. Now, we don't expect much anymore because we don't manufacture anything like what we once did. Certainly not compared to what we import these days anyway. And I made the joke before that given one of our more famous exports is Scotch whisky, trying to sell that to these two new markets, both of which are chiefly Muslim and therefore don't drink, is going to be vastly entertaining. In all seriousness though, that deal isn't anything to shout about at all. Our trade deal with the EU on our doorstep though is a far bigger issue. But without a single market or customs union agreement planned, or so Starmer says, it's completely borked. So whatever he says he can get in the way of a trade concession will be met with cheers and much crowing from his team and favourable media, but will not amount to a heck of a lot of change to any of us or to the economy, because he's not really serious about it. It's all about point scoring over the Tories, the tiniest wins being the best you can hope for from this Tory party B team for a bit of faint praise in the media. It'll be tinkering with trade barriers, tinkering with customs and excise, something like that. It will be tiny things. Another thing I know that has been mentioned has been negotiation of shared data between our security forces and Europol, which again has very little direct benefit to all of us in our individual lives. But again, it would come back to what would persuade the EU to reopen any kind of talks formally on this. Will it be Keir Starmer's electric personality and winning smile? There's a reason to shut the borders if ever there was one. What could the EU get from us outside of that single market and customs union, though? What could they see as being a benefit to them? Fundamentally, I can't see anything. Nothing that would make it worth their while, in my view. Should Starmer get into power, having brought this up previously, well, he would now need some kind of a win on this, wouldn't he, to deliver on it, because somebody would invariably remind him about it. Can't be certain he won't get something, of course, but anything that he would want from the EU would require a concession from them, and I just can't see justifiable cause for them to give him what he wants. If Keir Starmer is desperate to turn around the damage Brexit is doing, he might have to go further than he's willing to publicly say. Now, hang on a minute, Damo, you might be thinking. You're straying dangerously close to almost agreeing with those urging us to vote for Starmer because he's a liar here. Absolutely I'm not. That would be mad, precisely because you can't believe a word he says. That said, though, I do think there may be some method behind some of Starmer's madness here. What if he knows he can't get anything from the EU? What if he says to us, the public, oh, well, I've offered them shared security that would benefit us both. I've offered better trade terms that would benefit us both. But the point is they wouldn't benefit us both equally. We have so much more to gain from the EU than they do from us. And again, it comes down to, is it worth it to them? It's the question nobody can actually answer with any kind of certainty. But if Starmer believes he can't get what he wants, well, he can blame the EU, just as the Tories do, for everything wrong in this country that he then can't fix. He's got a track record of rampant dishonesty. He's got a manifesto to write that he's got to present to all of us ahead of that election that will be full of more promises, and he'll have a convenient scapegoat here to deliver on absolutely none of it should he get into power. Well, he is going to have a much harder job justifying not going further with the EU than the Tories have in such circumstances, because he was once Mr. Remain and Mr. Second Referendum, of course. Why all of a sudden, after promising that once upon a time, when it was convenient to use to undermine the Corbyn leadership, would he not see that once in power, some people will think, when it's all in his hands to effect the change he once allegedly wanted, so he said? His refusal on the customs union and single market will be something to haunt him by that point, I think, if this is what comes to pass. Because once upon a time he never ruled them out, and yet I think he would at this point, and people will again once more ask him to justify not returning to that stance, and the answer is very easy, because he never meant it. But he, of course, won't be able to say that. It was all about bringing down Corbyn and positioning himself as the next leader, and that worked. He doesn't want to rejoin. He thinks you'll still vote for him anyway if you believe that, because you want the Tories out. He's now focused on chasing Tory votes, and his Brexit stance now is aligned to that, as well as winning back Leave voters Labour lost in the Red Wall. Nothing Keir Starmer says or does is ever in the interest of anything or anyone except himself. This is all about optics. He could come to regret it for a short-term boost, especially when polling indicates he really didn't have to bring this up right now. What do you reckon, though? Can he get some concessions? Is it possible? I can't say for definitely that he can't, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's just pulling another fast one here. Can you see a reason for the EU to actually engage with him that I've missed? Is there some kind of incentive they would have to engage with us? Because they're a lot bigger than we are, and I'm not seeing it. Do let me know what your thoughts in the comments are below and be part of the conversation on this. So thanks for watching. Hope you found the video useful. Please do like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily, and if you've got this far, why would you want to miss more? Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Brexit Dover delays that I might have mentioned before were quite big news a few months ago. Perhaps Starmer could get something done about that, because all Sunak's bunch did after all was blame the French for it. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so I'm going to begin this video slightly differently. I'm going to jump straight into a quote. And the quote is this: Diane Abbott was the first ever black woman to be elected as an MP, whose dedication to equality continues to inspire us. The Labour Party owes Diane a great debt. Now, you might figure, in the wake of Diane Abbott's now 5-month-long suspension from the Labour Party, this is the sort of thing you can imagine Jeremy Corbyn saying, or John McDonnell saying, or one of the other socialist campaign group of left-wing Labour MPs saying. But this was actually Keir Starmer on June the 11th, 2020, well before he decided he'd found an excuse to eliminate her. Certainly that is the position Diane Abbott herself has taken in a proper arse-kicking attack on Starmer, saying in no uncertain terms that he's trying to force her out. For 5 months, Abbott has been suspended over a reply to an article that had been written in The Observer titled "Racism in Britain is not a black and white issue, it's far more complicated." Now, I've covered this incident more in depth in another video, which I'll link to, so I won't go over what was said again here. But fundamentally, an early draft of Abbott's reply had gone out instead of the final draft, and the one that went out was poorly written because it gave the impression that anti-black racism was a worse form of racism because it is based on obvious appearance, whereas those from racially abused demographics who might be white-skinned don't get that. An apology came out within hours from Abbott, dissociating herself completely from the reply that had gone out in her name, making clear the wrong draft had gone out. Didn't stop Starmer suspending her within hours, likely skipping with glee at the opportunity she presented him with to rid himself of another MP not loyal to him. In fact, Abbott is likely the most vociferous public critic of Starmer within the Parliamentary Labour Party, showing more spine than anyone else she shares those benches with, operating under his authoritarianism, largely in fear, as most of them seem to be giving the impression of. But the impression many of us will have had regarding this matter up until now was that she's been left in limbo for these past 5 months. But the truth appears to be a lot more sinister than that, and she's finally issued a response, an arse-kicking response. The whole thing is again linked to, so I'll just cover some of it here. The internal Labour Party disciplinary against me is fraudulent. I was told by the Chief Whip to actively engage with an investigation, but the Labour Whips are no longer involved. It is now entirely run out of the Labour Party HQ, which reports to Keir Starmer, and there is no investigation. This is the same Keir Starmer who almost immediately pronounced my guilt publicly. This completely undermines any idea that there is fairness or natural justice. It is procedurally improper. To be clear, I immediately and unreservedly apologised for my letter. Others have committed graver offences and belatedly grudging apologies have been wrong from them, yet they have been immediately excused as supporters of this leadership. The Labour Party has not charged me with anti-Semitism because they know it is untrue. As someone who has fought against all forms of racism all my life, I would consider it a very serious allegation. Instead, it has been used to smear me, my reputation, and decades of anti-racist work. Coming from the current leadership, it is hard to stomach. It is no secret that a large proportion of the racism that the Ford report uncovered was directed against me, including expressions of visceral disgust, drawing on racist tropes, and they bear little resemblance to the criticisms of white males elsewhere in the messages. I have never received an apology from the leader, the General Secretary, or any of the perpetrators for that racism. I am not even aware of any of the culprits facing disciplinary measures, as I am now obliged to do. I have remained silent about this issue until now. This was in the hope that some sense of decency and recognition of the tenets of natural justice might prevail. The Labour Party disciplinary machine has clearly shown that it has little interest in either. I am the longest serving black MP, yet there is a widespread sentiment that as a black woman and someone on the left of the Labour Party, that I will not get a fair hearing from this leadership. That's a damning statement. There's a lot more of it too, so do follow the link and read the whole thing, and she is 100% right. And all the evidence is there, not just proving her right, but also indicating that this is a planned and concerted move to remove her. For one thing, Starmer did declare her guilt publicly, because he stood up and said a response which, again, wasn't the finished version, was clearly anti-Semitic. Many Jewish people are, of course, white. It's also a disgrace that a disciplinary process has been completely undermined by the party leader, though given he's seized control of the issue, that's no surprise. It is also further undermined by Abbott's own actions in the past. One example being that she led a campaign to get the then Labour government of Gordon Brown to accept Jewish refugees here escaping from Yemen. Of course, it is also true that a lot of Jewish people knew what Abbott was trying to say and didn't take it the way Starmer has painted it. Jewish Voice for Labour, for example, had tweeted out that Diane Abbott breaks her silence to tell about Labour's unfair treatment of her and their ruthless purge of her local party for attempting to discuss the implications of the conviction for paedophilia of a local Starmer supporting councillor. I'll come on to the councillor aspect in a moment. Regular viewers will be familiar with the story already, but it also lends itself to the truth of what is really going on here. It isn't just Jewish people defending Abbott for a published reply that was clumsy, and this was also reinforces her points made in the Ford report, because Martin Ford KC himself has also defended Abbott by saying that he clearly understood what Diane Abbott meant, and that was that the racism suffered by non-whites is as a result of their particular protected characteristic being very much more obvious, as well as completely irrational. And he's right, this really ought to be obvious to anyone except those clearly intent on weaponising this issue. There is also no getting away from where the Starmer regime has given racism a free pass. The most blatant example you can compare this to is the instance of Neil Coyle, the Labour MP for Bermondsey and Old Southwark, who made xenophobic comments towards a British-Chinese journalist, Henry Dyer, in a Houses of Parliament bar. They were discussing the now debunked story of Labour MP Barry Gardiner receiving money from a Chinese spy, with Coyle allegedly saying he was being paid by Fu Manchu. When Dyer pointed out this was a Chinese trope and inappropriate, Coyle responded by saying, "From how you look like, you've been given renminbi to Barry Gardiner," implying Dyer might also have been giving Gardiner money. Dyer left feeling uncomfortable, but wanting to make amends before he left, he waved Coyle goodbye, which earned him a two-fingered salute from the MP. It took Starmer 4 days to suspend Coyle, and he's been quietly readmitted to the party since. I would suggest what he did was significantly more offensive than Diane Abbott having the wrong draft of a statement sent to a paper and apologising for it swiftly afterwards. Starmer made no public comment on Coyle as he did Abbott. Evidently, xenophobia isn't as big a deal as anti-Semitism to him, but then, as I've said for ages, no other form of racism is. And the proof of that is the Labour Party complaints page itself, which has a bespoke anti-Semitism complaints option, but no other form of racism does, and they all have to be reported through general complaints. In fact, Labour MP Darren Jones got asked about this very comparison on Sky, and he said MPs shouldn't get involved in disciplinary matters. But the trouble is, it was Starmer who got directly involved with suspending Coyle and restoring the whip to him, and it was Starmer who acted to suspend Diane Abbott before any investigation could possibly begin. The difference in how a left-wing MP and a right-wing one being treated is stark. And whatever your personal views of Diane Abbott are, she's always been a loyal Labour Party member, she's always served her constituents well, which is why she has one of the largest majorities in the country, and is a staunch opponent of all forms of racism, has a history to back that up, and so anyone pointing to the article and sneering when the mistake should be obvious should be ashamed of themselves. Also, if you think Starmer himself doesn't have an issue with race here, or women actually, you might like to know that Diane Abbott is actually the 6th woman of black or Asian heritage that Starmer has either sacked or removed the whip from since he became leader. Compare that with other examples, such as Labour MP Charlotte Nichols getting away with distributing anti-Gypsy, Roma and traveller election literature, Rachel Reeves extolling her admiration for notoriously anti-Semitic MP Nancy Astor, John Mann aggressively accosting Ken Livingstone in a stairwell, Barry Shearman's silver shekels comment to 2 Jewish businessmen, Peter Kyle referring to SNP leader Umza Yousaf as Mohammed, Rosie Duffield's ongoing turf behaviour. But hey, they're all white and right-wing, aren't they? But Diane Abbott is also right that this smacks of another effort to remove another left MP that Starmer doesn't want, because all he wants on his parliamentary benches are an army of loyal yes-men once he is in power, who won't dare not act as he commands. And I've covered numerous examples of the left being removed wherever the Starmer regime can manage it. Abbott's suspension has come alongside the London Labour takeover of Hackney North and Stoke Newington CLP, Diane Abbott CLP, on the basis of boundary changes. That's the excuse they're using, despite this CLP not changing by enough to warrant the imposition of a centralised Labour Party authority by the party's own rules going into the next election. So they're abusing their own rule book in doing this. And that happened back in July. And that's just a few months after Abbott was suspended. Another reason given for this, however, was that the incumbent CLP officers were asking awkward questions on the matter of safeguarding in the wake of the scandal involving convicted child pornographer and Labour Hackney councillor Thomas Dewey. Now, Dewey was in the CLP of Abbott's neighbour, Meg Hillier. In fact, Dewey had been her election agent. For the local executive and Abbott's constituency to be shut down and replaced, then, is therefore completely bizarre and can't be seen for anything other than a blatantly opportunistic power grab, because now the left-wing executive, the Diane Abbott favourable executive, has been completely replaced by a right-wing one, killing off her chances of reselection fundamentally, even if she gets the whip back completely. Abbott has been the MP there since 1987. Is this really how she's going to be removed? Well, she certainly thinks so. She believes she has no hope of a fair hearing. And when she's saying Starmer has basically seized control himself of the situation, she's almost certainly right. Will she stand as an independent, perhaps? Starmer's done a Corbyn on her, keeping her in the party, suspended. But the longer her suspension goes on, and with the right-wing in control of her CLP now, how much longer has she got before she is replaced? Based on what Starmer's already done, I think this is a foregone conclusion too. Clearly so does Diane Abbott. But what do you reckon? Should she run as an independent? Will she run? For my own part, I'd support her in doing so. Denying Starmer another seat that should be a safe win for his party, all because of his own petty factionalism, would be justice. Again, local members would, I'm sure, go out and campaign for their candidate Diane, not Starmer's pick for them. It'll drive more people to leave the party. The Labour ground game would again be destroyed. For what? Everything Starmer is doing in Labour is for himself. It's not a party for the many. It's not even a party for the few. It's his Labour now. He always calls it that. My Labour, he calls it. It's for him and him alone now. And if you don't like it, he'll show you the door. Well, Diane Abbott stood in front of that door right now, I fancy. And whatever she decides to do here on, we should all be on her side. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation for you where you can get all the background detail on Abbott's letter and get the gist of where we're at now as a result. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so today is history-making stuff, and not in a particularly good way, as consultants and junior doctors have coordinated strike action in response to the state the NHS has been left in, together with full pay restoration terms and conditions that have been trampled, with the government, instead of meeting them halfway, has spent more money fighting them than restoring pay and funding, therefore proving the money was there and always was, and it's just political choice not to provide it. They're now going to challenge their right to strike and, in fact, force them to work against their will, whether they're on strike or not, or face the sack. It's like someone took a bucket full of dumbass, tipped it out, and formed a government out of what slopped out. Not a brain cell in sight. You cannot force people to work against their will. That's a human rights violation. That's a workers' rights violation. You're talking about forced labour here. That's slavery, if you think about it. You cannot make these people work. You can't make any of them work. What are you going to do? Send the police in to hold doctors at gunpoint if they don't operate? It's idiocy. Well, no, of course not, Damo. That'll be mad. They'll just sack them all instead, won't they? Oh, will they? Where will the replacement doctors come from then? We have massive staffing shortages now. Threats of sackings would be insane. We'll end up with an even bigger backlog of patients than we already have. Well, when you lie as professionally as the Tories do, you know they'll have an answer for this. And the Burke in charge of health still, the eternally tiresome and woefully talentless Steve Barclay, has been blaming, you guessed it, the trade unions. Specifically, the British Medical Association. He's been going around claiming that locally agreed derogations, they would be exemptions to the strike action that had been agreed, were being shut down by the BMA. They're all militant. They're determined to threaten patient safety. Honestly, if you're still believing a word the Tories say on the NHS these days, I honestly despair, because nobody should ever trust the Tories with our health service. Or anything else, really, but especially not our health service. It gets said every election, and yet for 13 years people have still picked them to put into power, so if you vote Tory and can't get an appointment, you really do only have yourself to blame. What will make that worse come the next election is with Labour's leaders bought and paid for by private health interests, you can't trust them with the NHS anymore either. But blue Tories, red Tories, is all the same, really, isn't it? Anyway, needless to say, really, but I'm sure you'd appreciate a good debunking, Barclay was lying his Weasley black guts out. The BMA had to write to Barclay demanding he retract his false statements and patiently explain to him that any derogation requests to be made have to be agreed between themselves and NHS England. They cannot be unilaterally imposed by either organisation on their own, nor can they be made locally, which is another claim Barclay had made. They can only be worked out at a national level, and of course this is all part of the bedrock the Tories' minimum service levels bill is built on, supposedly to ensure a safe minimum service level, completely missing the point that the service is already unsafe as it is. But claims by Barclay such as this, not retracted and not corrected in the public domain, on the record, show that the minimum service levels bill is absolutely being built on a great big pile of deceit and lying to the public. I won't hold my breath. Barclay never seems to be of the opinion he's ever wrong, and like all Tories, there always has to be someone else to blame, doesn't there? Functionally, if staffing levels are threatened to become so low as to be a danger to public safety, they request a derogation from strike action. This goes to the BMA and NHS England, who make a decision on that based on what they're being told. No health sector strike action is ever designed to intentionally endanger patient care. Ever. God knows all these health professionals, no matter how hard up and struggling they may be, will always put themselves before patients. It's not why they enter the vocation, but trying to explain that to a Tory headbanger is like trying to explain algebra to a worm. They would rather believe Steve Barclay than the actual people who work in the service. They don't want to strike. It detracts from the time they'd rather spend looking after all of us. But it's because they find themselves unable to do that safely and securely that strike action is necessary. It's absolutely why we should all be supporting them. But such is the level of ignorance and hard-heartedness and irresponsibility coming from the Tories that now not only are doctors going on strike, but they feel they now have to coordinate that strike action to make their point even harder. Action that Barclay made no attempt to see off, telling an interviewer just this week who asked him if he'll be meeting the BMA to try and head this action off and speak to them, to be told he had no intention of doing so. What exactly does he do with his days? It's like it's a game to him, but it's our health and our lives he's toying with in his pursuit of a win. Well, a win for the Tories on this is impossible, and it's time they got real about it. For a start, one of Sunak's 5 pledges, we come back to those again, he's failing on them all of course, but one of them was to get waiting lists down on the NHS. Well, the waiting list is currently at 7.6 million in England, and it's reckoned that some 120,000 people died last year whilst on said waiting list, waiting to be seen. Now, someone explained to me how you get the waiting list down when at the same time you're attacking half the health workforce over pay terms and conditions. Staff seeing their pay cut and their workloads increasing to impossible, unsafe levels they can't hope to deliver. Explain to me how you get the waiting list down whilst health workers are still having to take industrial action because they have a health secretary that doesn't listen to them. For example, on pay, it's been 180 days since Barclay spoke to consultants and 140 days since he spoke to junior doctors. Is that a sign that this government is interested in resolving these strikes? Not on your Nelly, is it? Explain to me how threatening them with the sack, given how hard their jobs have become if they don't turn up, will incentivise them to work and accept their lot. Many, I think, would rather flip you the bird and take another job, but they wouldn't want to be doing that. They'd simply be left with no other choice. They need to make ends meet for themselves. That or go abroad where health workers are still respected and the general public are more on their side and not having their brains melted by reading right-wing tabloid hate rags spouting bile on the subject. Right now, the Tories are crowing today about inflation falling to 6.7%, but the offer for doctors has been 6% plus £1,250 as the final offer, below the headline rate of inflation. Food inflation, for the record, is still at 13%. It's not good enough. Why do these people not deserve a proper pay rise that isn't, in fact, a real terms pay cut? In Scotland, for example, where the SNP government engaged in meaningful discussions with doctors, they got a 17.5% pay rise over 2 years, and industrial action was completely avoided. Now, I suppose the Tories would consider that weak, but I call it treating these people who keep us alive and care for us when we need it most with a bit of common decency and respect. But let's not also pretend a proper pay rise isn't possible. It's just that the Tories simply don't believe in giving them one, preferring to think of themselves as being involved in some kind of a war with their own public sector. Sunak and Barclay were happy to clap on their doorsteps for these people once upon a time, but they never really cared one iota. And they don't care now that the cost of this action is being measured in lives, whilst they quibble about money that is within their power to spend if they just made different political choices. They won't make them, and Sunak's waiting list pledge will not be met for as long as they continue as they are. They'll blame the NHS for that, I'm sure, in time when it comes to the election. Don't believe them, though. Don't be so thick. Are you affected by the waiting list problems yourself, though? Who do you blame for that? Do you believe it's right and fair that people be forced to work against their will to address the situation, or are the government just failing in their most basic duty, which is the duty of care they have to all of us? Whatever your point of view, have your say on it in the comments. Be part of the conversation here. Thanks for watching, though. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where nurses got dragged to court earlier this year by Steve Barclay again. Also, he could stop them striking for a single day. Public purse getting raided again when it suited him, just not to suit us or suit those that look after us in our hour of greatest need. And, well, I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Rishi SUnak, you knew I was coming onto this today. He just gave the career-ending speech to end all careers, surely. Already languishing in double figures behind Labour in the polls, he decided to give a speech that showed without doubt just how desperately bad things have become since his comms director left. Literally standing up and banning stuff that was never government policy. Might have only been a consultation at one point in some kind of a mad Colombian marching powder-induced brainstorming session, maybe, but which made Sunak sound just utterly deranged and his desperate, look what I've done shtick. I won't make you have 7 bins, so I scrap that. I don't believe in a meat tax, so I scrap that too. Those inflections were just maddening, but not half as mad as what he was actually talking about. 7 bins Sunak. That's what he'll be known for from now until the end of time. 7 bins Sunak. So congratulations, Rishi. You finally did something memorable. A ban on having 7 bins. The 7 deadly bins even. I thought I'd seen it all when you Tory started ripping off the Green Party with your suddenly no longer blue election materials. But who knew Count Binface was going to be an inspiration for you as well? Putting 7 bins out each week. Can you imagine the dust carts? They'll have to become the size of monster trucks, won't they? Or is it a case of every night will suddenly become bin night, as we have one for every day of the week? Craig David could do a rewrite of his song 7 Days. He could call it 7 Bin Days. We could bin a Tory on Monday, then another one on Tuesday. We could bin another on Wednesday, and on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and bin another one on Sunday. Sounds like a plan to me. Binning Tories. How about a ban on the meat tax? Who knew about the meat tax? Banning the meat tax. Stealthy vegetarian wokerati at work, I suppose that was. I'm quite glad he's binned this made-up Tory policy, if I'm honest. I thought to myself, enforced veganism was on the cards. The cost of living crisis would put meat out of our reach. You could get fined in the street for thinking about pork. Chicken nugget dealers would be springing up on street corners across the country. Turkey Twizzlers would become a Class C drug. A ban on taxes to discourage flying. Well, he came up with that nugget as well. Well, that was blatantly self-serving, wasn't it, given Sunak takes private jets like we catch taxis? He took 23 private flights over a period of 187 days, including one trip from London to Blackpool on a 14-seat RAF jet when it was only a 3-hour train trip. A ban on compulsory car sharing, he said. Well, he's banning James Corden from our TVs as a consequence, and I'm all for that one. I'm joking, obviously, but still, ban James Corden. It makes as much sense as anything else Sunak came out with. Then there's the banning of expensive insulation upgrades he came out with, because those poor, broke, starving, struggling energy companies, they might see a dent in their measly profits, I suppose. I mean, when he's come out with a litany of absolute batshittery as this is, it does make you wonder what could be in the next Tory manifesto, doesn't it? How much further could he go? What else is he going to promise to try and get back into power again? A ban on monsters hiding under the bed, maybe. Santa Claus now being required to take a pilot's test licence. A tax on hamsters, maybe. A ban on side partings. You'll need a new haircut yourself there, Rishi, but I'm sure you'll levy a tax to pay for that on bald is beautiful head polish. Well, that's just discrimination against we the follically challenged, isn't it? Will he announce a cancellation of a new, not really being proposed, but we'll claim it anyway, Velcro tax? How will you offset that one then? Well, we'll fine young mums for having messy buns. Tooth fairy tax avoidance will be clamped down on by EHRC, and we're going to force all pound shops to rename themselves £1.50 stores. Oh, and by the way, you don't need those recycling bags of yours anymore. Not now you've got 7 bins you haven't got room for. You can wear them, reduce, reuse, recycle and all that. They'll make a lovely jacket, very bright. You won't be knocked down at night wearing one of those, will you? Honestly, if he'd actually achieved anything in his first year of power, he wouldn't need to do a speech this daft, so hastily rushed and put together. And actually that belies the truth of the whole thing, because it very much looks like Rishi SUnak is running scared of Liz the Lettuce Truss. She gave a speech the other day, which was itself completely bonkers. But a lot of what Sunak also said in his even more ridiculous speech was to offset much of what Truss said she wanted. Now, she wanted petrol and diesel cars to stay for longer, so Sunak has pushed back banning them until 2035. Truss wanted oil and gas boilers to stay. Well, those boilers now will remain until 2035 as well. And who can forget the fact those oil and gas licences are staying as well, conveniently being applied for by the likes of BP and Shell, who have IT contracts with Infosys, who, if you remember, are the family firm of Rishi Sunak's wife. So again, he's on the take there for himself. Truss is still pushing him in the aftermath of these announcements, however, as pleased as she was with the madness he spouted, to drop the windfall tax on energy companies and bring back fracking. So watch this space for further watering down of what will deliver net zero in this country if Rishi Sunak fears he's in any danger of his own position. The claim it'll still be reached by 2050, of course, is a farce. And frankly, knowing that Sunak doesn't care one iota about the environment, even before he made this mad speech, he can quote 2050 all he likes, because he'll be gone long before that target is failed, and it won't be his problem when the world burns for the next generation. Needless to say, the message he conveyed last night was badly received, to put it politely, not just by the public, but by politicians across the board and across the world. A snap poll by Channel 4 showed that 40.7%, that's 40.7% of respondents were now less likely to vote Tory after that speech on watering down net zero commitments, which, given he's already miles behind Labour in the polls, now means that the Tory party must be verging on extinction level damage. One reason to celebrate? Absolutely, for sure. But not so much when you realise there's Keir I hate tree huggers Starmer waiting in the wings to carry on where he's left off. Zach Goldsmith, who recently quit as the International Environment Minister on the basis Sunak doesn't care about the environment at all, and he said so in his resignation letter, is demanding a general election now. So dangerous as he considers Sunak, a Tory is literally calling for an election he knows his party's bound to lose. Boris Johnson has laid into Sunak as well, and for once, pertinently, as it's been pointed out that the only mandate Sunak actually has is the one Boris Johnson himself won in 2019, which had in it a commitment to achieve net zero by 2050 with investment in clean energy solutions and green infrastructure, which Sunak has decided to tear up. He has no mandate to do that. Literally, nobody has elected a party led by him to do that. Not even his own party membership elected him to be leader of their own party. And that does not sit well with voters either. He lacks legitimacy big time and is, and of himself, a real danger now to his own party. Even before this speech, his approval ratings were down as low as Johnson's were towards the end of his tenure. There is already talk of letters of no confidence going in on Sunak to the 1922 committee before this speech, with Sunak's one-year grace period expiring next month. So will he be triggered straight after Tory party conference now? Well, it looks decidedly more likely. It's certainly not something I'd bet against. Internationally, people have spoken out against him as well. Al Gore. Al Gore, do you remember Al Gore? Remember him? He's waded in and expressed his shock and disappointment that Sunak has done the wrong thing. That young people feel like they've been stabbed in the back, and even Tories have apparently told him they feel utterly disgusted with what Sunak has done. He also notably pointed to the fossil fuel companies who use their wealth to slow things down when it comes to net zero and the green agenda. And when Sunak is linked via his family's financial links to the fossil fuel industry, via Infosys, as I've already mentioned, it's even more than that when it comes to him. At the end of the day, the serious note here is that Rishi Sunak is so anti-green agenda, so anti-environment, he felt he had to make a load of policies up that do not exist in order to pretend he'd scrap them in order to look more green than he actually is. Because although he couldn't give less of a damn about climate change, he knows the British public do. Yet he's taking each and every one of us for fools over it. Because he cannot relate to us whatsoever, and he just thinks he's cleverer than we are. He is a dangerous, greed-driven, out-of-touch idiot. An absolute threat to the world, when this issue cannot and must not be ignored and needs to be dealt with properly and here and now. He stood there and lied through his teeth that we're on target for net zero because he couldn't care less if we are or not, and already we're not, and even less so after this. He spoke of a brighter future for the next generation when he's basically upturned 7 bins of trash all over that promise. If we keep kicking this can down the road, it's only going to cost more to rectify it all in the long term. Changes become necessary harder and faster, so if he's moaning about cost and effort now, politicians like him further down the road, they're going to be moaning even more about it. The Tories faced an emphatic general election defeat before he made this speech. They'll be lucky to have anyone left after this, because Rishi SUnak has basically told us in the maddest, most dishonest way possible that none of us can afford to have him re-elected. None of us can afford to vote Tory, not if we still want a planet to live on. That kind of politics will be the end of us if we don't vote for a party that'll do what needs to be done now, before it costs us even more to change, or before it's too late at all and we're done for. We need more Green Party MPs desperately now, because literally the next generation, if they're to have a world worth living in, depends on that now. Did you watch Sunak's speech? What did you make of it yourself? Were you going to vote Tory and change your mind now? Are you going Green because of this, or were you planning on voting Green anyway because we need that shift in our politics? Do let me know your views and opinions in the comments below. Have your say, be part of the conversation as always. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Do like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Liz Truss seems to be the driver of Sunak's hurried and rushed madness here. Fearing her faction will undermine him, perhaps. Is that what all this is about? Is it about Sunak consolidating power for himself and blow to the planet in his pursuit of that? But the trouble is, by offsetting her speech here, Sunak is basically also putting her back in charge of the country again. Surely that's madder than anything that he actually said in his speech yesterday. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Kemi Badenoch, the business secretary, had the luckless joy of trying to sell Rishi Sunak's net zero policy, taking a torch to the planet to the British public on the media rounds this morning. And for somebody who had reached her peak by hacking Harriet Harman's laptop, we shouldn't be especially surprised to find politics basically evades her. Though, of course, that doesn't stop some of the right-wing rags referring to her as a rising star. Though that bright speck you see on the horizon isn't so much a star ascending into the heavens, it's more likely to be next door's field on fire due to climate change. Oh well, let's hope there's no livestock in it. By the time that barbecue is finished, the farmer might find himself then liable for the meat tax after all. Anyway, the rising star set herself up for her own 7 binfuls of stupid on Sky News this morning, speaking to Jane Secker, who put it to Badenoch that these changes, they don't really help the poorest in society. A lot of people would argue the poorest in society aren't fretting over when they're going to replace their car, because the poorest in society don't drive in this country. Well, that's certainly a valid point. Not everyone can afford to. Cars are expensive to buy, expensive to run, the tax, the insurance, the maintenance, the ever-increasing price of fuel. And frankly, the poorest in society have enough on their plates trying to find food to, well, put on their plates. But not to worry. I'm sure there's a solution to this problem, isn't there, Kemi? Do tell us what you think. Well, what do you say to this? Well, this is what she said. She said, "I'm sorry, Jane, but that is a ludicrous statement. If you step outside of London, come to my constituency, you will find the poorest in society drive because they live in a rural area. What you said is actually quite astonishing." Is it though? No, I don't think it is. The poorest people are the ones queuing up around the corner to the food bank. They're not queuing in cars. The poorest people are the ones who will have walked there, or if without choice caught a bus if it's that far away. Hopefully they had enough cash for that though, otherwise they're in for a heck of a walk. They're 7 times less likely to have access to a car actually, and only a third of the country actually even drive at all, Kemi. Frankly, I should be astonished that you're actually anywhere near government with an attitude like yours. You're clearly as thick as mince, not on top of your brief, haven't got a clue about the real world in this country, and aren't these politicians always the ones complaining about being aggressively interviewed and interrupting when they're trying to say something, when actually the shoe was very much on the other foot here? But actually, when you remember 7 bins Sunak is running the country, Badenoch spouting something equally as bonkers and out of touch trying to defend it, shouldn't really come as a massive surprise, such as the level of talent on show in that party, where IQs are measured in double digits, common sense is a sacking offence, and unless Sunak or his family can make some money out of it, he doesn't want to know. Certainly true that rural areas have weaker transport links than more populous urban areas do. I live in West Cornwall. I know a thing about remoteness and public transport lacking, or issues or lack thereof. But does Kemi Badenoch herself really? When was the last time she took the bus? Her constituency is Saffron Walden in Essex. Certainly rural Essex, definitely is, but there's no escaping the fact that your patch does have good transport links into and out of London, as you would expect, especially when you consider that the single biggest employer you represent as the local MP is Stansted Bloody Airport. Being rural Essex with those close London links, I think your idea of who the local poor people are might be rather relative too, insofar as it is an inordinately expensive area to live in, with the average two-bed property, according to a bit of snooping I did on Rightmove today, two-bedroom property pushing £500,000 in Saffron Walden. Now, I'm sure there must be council and social housing there too. Genuinely, there will be poor people, as there are in every affluent area around the country. But being rural, with a lower population density, it'll be less prevalent than more urban settings. The point is, your own constituency isn't likely a very good candidate to measure national relative poverty, national relative levels of concentrations of poor people, the poorest people in society, degrees of being poor in relation to car ownership, and with the transport links you have, many people simply won't need cars there where you live either, or where you represent either, or at least didn't before even buses got priced out of their reach, and, well, that's if they turn up these days as well. Badenoch also got questioned about those same poor people whose cars they apparently drive that don't really exist, in relation to boiler upgrades too, that they now won't get because their landlords won't now upgrade them. Sunak's policy on this pushed upgrading to heat pumps back to 2035, but also announced there would be exemptions for the poorest. But that can look kind of sinister too, can't it? Since they are more likely to rent and less likely to own, how many of these people would genuinely be affected as far as renter versus home ownership amongst the poorest goes? Are housing associations and councils going to be made to upgrade, or are they going to be exempted because their tenants happen to be amongst the poorest in society? Is that not the case? And can tenants then expect a rent increase to pay for the therefore enforced upgrades that will be coming from their housing associations or for the councils, whether it comes sooner or later, because that becomes a moot point at this point? Surely, from their perspective, it's just a matter of timing. It's going to come anyway eventually. Either way, it is lose-lose for them. Badenoch got asked as well about whether Sunak is just prepared to let the planet burn so he can appeal to a certain sector of voters, those climate denialists, maybe win himself a favourable column from Andrew Neil in The Fail, and Badenoch had put to her the words of Zac Goldsmith, the former Tory MP and International Environment Minister, who said, "This is cynical beyond belief. The Prime Minister is pretending to halt frightening proposals that simply do not exist. He's doing it to turn the environment into a US-style political wedge issue, something the UK has avoided all my political life. Sunak is chucking the environment into the political fire purely to score points. That is reprehensible." That's from Zac Goldsmith. That's from a Tory peer, as he is. That's pretty gut-punchy stuff, isn't it? What was Badenoch's response to that, then? Ignore him because he's rich. Well, he's not as rich as Sunak, so if wealth is a reason not to trust him, surely we should trust Sunak even less. Well, Badenoch said, "I fundamentally disagree with what he has said. We are listening to the concerns people are raising with us. Most people in this country don't have the kind of money he has. We have to think about what people can reasonably afford." Have you, though? Have you ever done that? I don't think so. Tories listening to the concerns of the poorest who don't vote for them and think they all suck. You've listened to them so hard that Sunak announced all of this in a hurried last-minute public announcement that came hard off the back of Liz Truss taking a swing at him in her own mad public announcement. Honestly, you could get more intellectual and informative value from listening to the white noise coming out of an out-of-tune radio than listening to Kemi Badenoch. Her attitude was one of hissing and spitting at whatever Jane Secker asked in the way of questions sent her way. She might as well have just made those sounds to go with it. It was a multi-car pile-up of an interview, and it doesn't matter whether they were petrol, diesel or electric, they're all scrap now. A charmless, cold, incompetent response to what was an insane speech that will probably send the Tories into a polling freefall. It's also not helping her personally because, bear in mind, as the business secretary, she's supposed to be all about saving jobs and providing security for workers. Yet Sunak's U-turns on this provide none of that. Car makers, for example, are up in arms because just last week they were given reassurances about the move to ban petrol and diesel cars, and yet now that's been pushed back 5 years. Complete disarray, and the Burke Badenoch defends that. She's had one tilt at a leadership race, at trying to become Prime Minister, leader of the Tory party herself. You can imagine if she'd want another, then being flaky over something so politically stupid as this, well, who's going to be tempted to back her in the future? When arrogance was dished out, Badenoch was at the front of the queue. A pity she didn't join the queue for when brains were dished out as well. This government is the most talentless bunch of chancers I've ever witnessed run in this country. We need an election now. No bones about that. And if this SADC party wants any hope of re-election or even survival and not face absolute annihilation at the next general election, they need to bin Sunak as fast as they possibly can. It doesn't matter which one he goes in. You've got 7 to pick from. Just pick one. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. And do share your thoughts on this in the comments below. Have your say and be part of this conversation too. Meanwhile, here's another video recommendation where Badenoch would probably call her greatest achievement that CPTPP trade deal to replace the one we had with the EU. But there's issues with that. It's nothing like it's been cracked up to be. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer is to lies what day is to night. The sun is to the moon what Tom is to Jerry. He lies like a rug. But surprisingly, for a change, it isn't alternative media solely calling him out for his latest example of what would appear to be some rather rank dishonesty, which I'll come on to presently. But it's been made all the more surprising given the Tories are dominating the headlines at the moment with talk of their meat taxes and their 7 bins and coordinated industrial action by junior doctors and consultants as they continue to fail our health service, as what many have been reporting on as a sensible Brexit position to take for Starmer. His review or his rewrite of the deal has got some attention from them. His desire to get a better deal than we have now on trade, on national security, but absolutely no chance, you understand, of entering into the single market again or into a new customs union. So on the face of it, he was appealing to businesses and business leaders with this, who have complained about how bad the Brexit deal has been for them, a deal Starmer incidentally voted for. So there's the first bit of dishonesty to this story, just a snifter of it though, there's more to come. It'll be bitterly disappointing to those remainders, the FBPE hashtaggers, follow back pro-EU as that stands for, who have ardently supported him even while Corbyn was still leader, calling Corbyn a secret leaver and hailing Starmer as the second coming for EU membership. Well, it doesn't go nearly far enough for most of them. But of course, some are determined that he must be lying in order to deliver this, and we should support him because secretly he'll take us back in. But he doesn't want to be appealing to them now. He wants to be appealing to the Brexit leavers at this point. This is all Starmer's grand plan, according to them. Anyway, Labour, as we know, lost the red wall over their position on Brexit going into the 2019 general election, largely a situation Starmer, the then shadow Brexit secretary, had himself set up, calling for a second referendum with Remain as an option at the 2018 Labour conference and destroying his own party's electoral chances. His faction failed to regain power or control of the party in 2017. They found something to hurt Corbyn electorally in 2019, though, and so their little plot worked. And we know it was such a plot because Starmer dropped the topic of Brexit like a hot potato from the time he became Brexit leader, up until now, really. So there's even more dishonesty in relation to all of this story. You know, one thing we don't talk about so much is what Corbyn's position actually was in 2018 before Starmer's act of sabotage. He was sitting on the fence, is what most people thought. He wasn't getting a great deal of coverage on such things either. The media far more fixated on destroying him in the interests of the establishment class, not really listening to what he had to say on stuff. However, not being in power, and with the Tories at each other's throats and completely divided, it seemed an unhelpful thing to come out with a bespoke position of Labour's own at that point. The Tories were being given enough rope to hang themselves, so to speak. So Starmer coming out onto stage with a Labour position subsequently ended up becoming an act of sabotage. But Corbyn did say the kind of deal his party would support should the Tories come forward with it. If you deliver a deal that includes a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, if you protect jobs, people's rights at work and environmental and consumer standards, then we will support that sensible deal. That's what Corbyn said. That was basically Labour's actual true position. But sure, to some he was a rabid leaver and they won't hear a word of it. He put forward a sensible option with widespread support that ended the years of debate we were all sick and tired of for the Tories to deliver, and they failed utterly to do so. So that's what brings us up to the here and now anyway. But for all of Starmer's self-serving switching between Remain being on a ballot and delivering on the Brexit deal he voted through but now wants to tweak, there has, courtesy of Sky, been a bit of footage leaked out from 2020 as it happens, a trip to Canada that Starmer had taken that might imply the FBPE crowd hoping for another Starmer lie on Europe, a lie regarding possibly taking us back in as a consequence, could well be onto something, and that rejoining might actually be on the cards for Team Keith. So this story is a case that Starmer was in Montreal in 2020 at a conference of supposedly centre-left leaders. So frankly, what Starmer was doing there, I've no idea. But it was 2020, still early days into his own premiership. People were still giving him the benefit of the doubt. It was September 2020. And he was sat there on stage with the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store, and he was asked a question on relations with the EU by a certain John McTernan, who comes up in conversation on some of my videos now and again. And if you aren't aware of the guy by now, he was a former advisor to Tony Blair. He was the strategist that saw Labour lose Scotland, and also the Australian Labour Party of Julia Gillard lose as well. The fact he was there, though, and got to ask Starmer a question no less, would, if this had been reported at the time, been a klaxon warning to the left. But this was Starmer's response, which is relevant in terms of what he's saying about his plans for a future relationship with the EU. He said, most of the conflict with the UK being outside of the UK, he meant EU, fluffed his words, arises insofar as the UK wants to diverge and do different things to the rest of our EU partners. Obviously, the more we share values, the more we share a future together, the less the conflict. And actually, different ways of solving problems become available. Actually, we don't want to diverge. We don't want to lower standards. We don't want to rip up environmental standards, working standards for people that work, food standards, and all the rest of it. So suddenly, you're in a space where, notwithstanding the obvious fact that we're outside the EU and not in the EEA, the European Economic Area, there's a lot more common ground than you might think. So Starmer is saying there that most of the conflict we have with the EU regarding the UK now being outside of it is down to the UK wanting to diverge from the EU further. Certainly the mentality and the narrative of a lot of Tories. And he's saying that he and his party don't want to diverge, don't want to lower standards, and implies the common ground is there for that to happen. Sounds very much like he does want a closer relationship with the EU, or certainly did back in 2020, before much of the damage from Brexit, it can be argued, was really being felt. We now are definitely feeling it. The food shortages, the cost of living crisis, the trade barriers, the screw-ups in relation to Northern Ireland being out but still in. So if Keir Starmer felt like he said before we became embroiled in all of that mess, by how much is he seeking to not diverge further from the EU now, in which case? For the record, I voted Remain. I didn't trust the Tories one iota to deliver anything in our interests, and as much as the EU was imperfect in a great many ways, they provided a check on our government, which I felt was very, very important. But if Starmer is plotting a much closer future relationship with the EU based on past comments he's made on video, because there's always a receipt when it comes to him, social media always keeps a record after all, he gets caught out time after time for being a big fat fibber. Who would trust him not to, in light of this video footage Sky have unearthed, not seek a closer relationship with the EU after all? That could even include a single market and customs union. Maybe that's something you would quite like after all. It would certainly solve a lot of problems currently being felt, and certainly a great deal of those FBPE crowd would love to see it. My issue is, if that is actually what he is planning, why is it he always has to take the road of dishonesty in order to promote anything or do anything? Why is it he cannot ever make the case for something, a positive case? He is just an overarching aura of negativity at all times. And the answer to that is he's running scared of the right-wing media. He's been licking Rupert Murdoch's boots for months. His retirement will be coming as a blow to Team Keith, I'm sure. And many of those publications were Brexit supporting. Equally, he wants the red wall seats Labour lost back, who went Tory because they wanted to leave the EU. They voted for Brexit. Many blaming Europe for their hardships. I would hope many had learnt now it was really the Tories, since things have only become worse, and that rancid party is the cause of so much damage in this country. But when Starmer can't be straight with us about his true intentions on anything, seemingly ever, can you really believe him when he says no to the single market and customs union. And even if he really truly means it in his heart of hearts, assuming he has one, the EU will want an incentive to reopen talks of that magnitude that go far beyond the planned 2025 review. So what would he offer though, in which case? And why is that not being asked or spoken about? What do you think? Is this another example of Starmer pulling a fast one on us? Has he been plotting to go back in all this time and now is his chance? Or is it all a cynical ploy just for votes? Would you want to go back in? Have you changed your mind? And if so, what do you think Starmer should be saying? Or are you still happy we left? And if that is the case, what do you make of Starmer in light of this story? Do let me know in the comments below and be part of the conversation on this. I always take an interest. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please do like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Here's a video recommendation where the Tories are running scared of their own Brexit inquiry. Now, I can't imagine why that would be. And does this provide Starmer with incentive for what he's saying now? Well, I don't know. You tell me. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so some actual mainstream news I can actually get behind and celebrate and call not into question for once, because coffin-dodging dust farter and the most pernicious and malign influence in our public discourse for the last getting on for 60 years, since he bought the news of the world back in 1969, Rupert Murdoch has finally decided the time is right to move on to new things at the age of 92. I can only presume to spend more time in his crypt. Perhaps he's had an interior decorator in to do the place up a bit, possibly on the recommendation of Peter Mandelson. You can fill in the gap there with what you'd quite like to see him moving on to. I dare say some suggestions will crop up in the comments, but keep it clean and keep it polite, please. It's a reason to celebrate, though, because this guy has been a pervasive influence on our politics for too long. He literally makes or breaks future leaders, and not just here, but all over the world, securing the future for the elite. So his departure from the reins of News Corp and Fox News might leave us with a chance of starting to perhaps undo some of the damage done by a guy that has proven to be an absolute scourge on humanity. Aside from ensuring every politician since Margaret Thatcher here in this country was basically chosen by him, right up to his most recent summer party attended by both Rishi SUnak and Keir Starmer, as both were courting his favour, it shows who's really in charge around here, doesn't it? He's been responsible for so much damage, it's silly. He heavily promoted Donald Trump in the US for the presidency there, was regularly on the phone to Trump, Fox News going to extreme lengths to dismiss talks of his guilt regarding insurrection, and very much promoting the narrative that the election was indeed stolen from him, thanks to those pesky voting machines and their Democrat programming. That, of course, led to a lawsuit with Dominion Systems, which got settled just before the court case began for some $700 million. I mean, that's a drop in the ocean to a multi-billionaire like Murdoch, though. In his native Australia, he's just as bad. In the last 21 Australian federal and state elections, just as he's done in this country here, with all of our general elections since 1979, Murdoch has acted as a massive campaigning presence for Conservative politicians, taking control of the news narratives and the political agendas and shaping them and pushing relentlessly the views and opinions in a positive light of the right wing and even the far right. Murdoch is right-wing himself, combined with having control of so many news outlets. It's literally how he began his career, buying up smaller publications and growing an empire, that he now completely swamps his competitors, drowns them out, and thus come headlines in the scum saying it was the Sun what won it each and every election here, and the same happens abroad. And so when you have someone with so much malign global influence, with his inherently ideological bias towards the right, it's little wonder not just this country, but many countries around the world are in the states they're in. It's not so much of an exaggeration to call him one of the most dangerous men alive. He is a threat to democracy through and through. This is a man of exorbitant wealth, of extreme influence and power, and yet uses it all to make the world a worse place for all of the rest of us to live in. He is a black hole where hope went to die. The Iraq War, for example, probably wouldn't have happened if not for Murdoch. The US invasion in 2003, it was called by the New York Times as Mr. Murdoch's War, because he'd been the one calling for it through his publications in the run-up to the invasion, replete with commentary when the invasion began and continued about US soldiers being liberators and, of course, all those weapons of mass destruction. The Republican Party in the US is as beholden to him as the Tory Party in this country are, including red Tories, so it's little wonder the meeting of minds of George Bush and Tony Blair happened as it did, Murdoch even ending up godfather to one of Blair's kids. In fact, it is alleged by Blair's spin doctor Alistair Campbell in his diaries that Blair finally entered the fray when Murdoch rang him on a private line, no going through the Downing Street switchboard for him, assuring him of his support if Blair joined the US invasion, which obviously he did. All the Blair telling Bush, "I'm with you to the end" business apparently began with a setup by Murdoch, though the talking nutsack has always denied this. At the time of the Iraq War happening, can you imagine how many newspaper titles Murdoch's empire had actually racked up? Have a guess, how many rags globally did he own at that point? 30? 50? He owned 175 titles at that point, and every single one of them was pumping out pro-Iraq war narratives. Awfully big coincidence that they all followed the same line, isn't it? 175 of them all over the world. That can't possibly have had anything to do with diktat from the top, could it? It was good for ratings, though. Never mind if millions of Iraqis died, along with soldiers on all sides, eh? He sold papers. He did the same thing with Brexit. The economic damage we're all living with here and now today. But if you're the sort, or know someone who's still buying Murdoch's hate rags here, then you're helping to fund the guy who helped engineer that too. It's no secret Murdoch didn't like the EU. He didn't have the influence with them that he enjoyed elsewhere. He didn't like European policies, and he actually told the Prime Minister at one point that if he couldn't change European policies, then his papers wouldn't be supporting his Tory party. Now that was a conversation Murdoch had with John Major back in 1997. And of course Murdoch then went on to support Tony Blair instead, of course. But Major later said, years later, given what happened since and in context of that conversation he had, was that Murdoch wanted a referendum on the UK leaving the EU. And this was borne out by 2016 when the Scum newspaper ended up spending some £96,000 on a pro-Brexit poster, and News Group UK, the Murdoch UK media parent group, registered themselves with the Electoral Commission as an official Leave EU campaign group. Murdoch literally turned his publications into a pro-Brexit lobbying group, and if that isn't a prime example of the media making the news and not just reporting on it, I really don't know what does. But this is Murdoch all over. It's what he's done for decades. And we know he does this. We know he loves the power trip from it. We know he has politicians driven by self-serving ambition and greed seeking his blessing at all times. They can't get rid of Keir Starmer, his offices recently said, always writing in the hateful rags as he does here. So you see, the departure of Rupert Murdoch really is something that should be celebrated. But the news empire he's built is going to continue. His son Lachlan is taking over. However, with 6 kids to his name, handing the reins of power to just one, and it being the third born at that, might be putting the cat amongst the pigeons there. There has never been a more poison-filled entity to political and social discourse globally than Rupert Murdoch. His ability to railroad through civil, societal and political discussions by virtue of the size of his empire and how he uses it, by distorting what we see to be the facts away from what is the reality, warping opinion and thinking, dividing us all, telling us who to hate, and we end up living in a country no longer able to unite in our own best interests. If you're watching Talk TV, if you're listening to Talk Radio, if you're still buying the Scum or the Times or the Sunday Times, then you are being influenced by this man on what to think, because it isn't news. It's never been news. It's his propaganda. His entire empire is built on it. How likely that is to change very much depends on his heir, though by making himself chairman emeritus, he's not completely gone for good, and frankly, for as long as Rupert Murdoch is still drawing breath, that may not change. His is a legacy of gaming the political system, of distorting truth, or election rigging, or phone hacking. So while numerous other right-wing rags extol his non-existent virtues and call him a titan of a figure with decades of involvement in our media, the truth of the matter is he's left a legacy of a planet being on fire, and having lived as long as he has, he actually deserves to live a little bit longer and see what he built crumble. That I would love to see. But it won't happen for as long as people keep buying into the snake oil that he's still selling. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily, and do have your say on these events in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where there's hope his empire finally falling could already be happening, as the profits for his media empire have, well, they've recently dropped off a bit of a cliff. Perhaps that has prompted his departure. Who knows? And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so a pro-Israel lobby group have dropped their legal action against what passes for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. So much for their publicly made threats to bankrupt Labour over this issue as well. Definitely no longer the party of Jeremy Corbyn, of course, but then this lot rose to prominence by attacking him specifically and his administration, members of whom were also facing litigation here, alongside the Labour Party itself, not only because of their pro-Israel nature, but because of their weaponisation of the issue of anti-Semitism, and indeed it is their own ardent pursuit of that that has led them to wanting to sue the Labour Party sometime later. So, why has it all been dropped now? Surely you don't take on the Labour Party in court for fun. If they were serious about the scourge of anti-Semitism and they really wanted to show their pro-Israel credentials, and they clearly thought that they were in the right at one point, why haven't they seen this through? Is it all a scam by any chance? Or was the litigation just not going their way because, I don't know, they weren't getting anywhere with it? The group we're talking about here is Labour Against Antisemitism, the LAAS, who regular viewers will have heard me discuss a time or two before, and the litigation they were presenting was in relation to a report called The Work of the Labour Party's Governance and Legal Unit in Relation to Anti-Semitism 2014 to 2019, although it's far better known as the Labour Leaks Report. A lot easier to say as well. This was meant to be submitted as part of an investigation by the Equalities Watchdog as a defence against all the accusations of anti-Semitism Team Corbyn were on the receiving end of. The evidence the party itself had compiled in relation to tackling the issue of anti-Semitism, as well as other incidents of bullying, harassment and mistreatment that had been evidenced and documented. It never got the authorisation to be submitted in the end though, so shortly after Keir Starmer became leader, it got leaked as a whistleblower event to make sure the truth got out there, and we learned of just how dysfunctional Labour HQ were, how they were actively working against Corbyn's administration, misappropriating funds, the infamously abusive WhatsApps, particularly aimed at people like Diane Abbott. Fundamentally, it was an 860-page document evidencing the party machine, right-wing as it was, working harder to undermine Corbyn however they could than try and win an election. Now, Starmer has blown ridiculous sums of money to no avail in trying to find out not who the perpetrators actually were in the report, not finding out what they were doing in actual fact and punishing them by association with what they've been doing, but he was more interested in finding out who just actually leaked it, and even now is involved in a court case against 5 former staffers who his regime accuses of leaking the report, but for which there is no evidence really, that he's already blown some £500,000 on, and the legal bill could yet rise to some £4 million. Let's not forget here, Keir Starmer, he's a lawyer, former head of the CPS. He's been Director of Public Prosecutions, as he's infamously and repetitively kept telling us. And he's fighting a case that actually he's got no evidence for. So it makes me wonder, is he actually just an idiot who has been promoted his entire life way over his head? Or is he so obsessively factional he's prepared to waste party money fighting a case that he cannot possibly win? Well, you decide. Have your thoughts on that, let me know. But at any rate, let's get back to Labour Against Antisemitism's part in all of this. You see, they are renowned for one thing above all else, and that's making complaints about anti-Semitism to the Labour Party. They claim to have submitted some 6,000 complaints to the Labour Party, and this was flagged up in the Labour Leaks report as an example of how incompetent the handling of complaints was, because one key passage in it showed John Stolliday, who was the then head of Labour's Governance and Legal Unit, he now works for right-wing-led trade union Unison, asked about these 6,000 cases, and he asked whether they were all in hand. Well, surely you ought to have known yourself, John. It was your department, was it not? Who exactly was running things, if not you? At any rate, reference to the organisation then came up, where the LAAS were considered problematic. It's nice, isn't it? The response on that came from Sam Matthews, later star of that John Ware panorama farce. But at the time, he was Labour's head of disputes, who told Stolliday, "We are not working with them under any sort of formal agreement. They are, however, serial complainants, mainly via Ewan Phillips. He says he has sent us 6,000 individual anti-Semitic incidents across 700 cases. While the 6,000 figure is likely an exaggeration, it's possible he might have sent us 6,000 screenshots. He certainly has not sent us 700 individual reports. There are 2 individuals who run Labour Against Antisemitism, Ewan Phillips and Emma Picken. A search of my inbox, legal queries and disputes, returns 157 results for the 2 of them in total." So, functionally, not only do they seem to have turned making complaints to the Labour Party into a hobby, but they aren't even honest about how many they have actually sent. And when you're exaggerating something like this, you're not really fighting anti-Semitism, are you? You're blatantly using it as a stick to beat someone with. In this case, Jeremy Corbyn and his administration. But this was all in a report that got leaked, and this is what ultimately prompted the legal action. Never mind that the likes of Phillips and Picken bragged publicly about how many reports they'd sent in. They were named in what was supposed to be a confidential report that got publicly leaked. Their anonymity had therefore been breached, and Labour must pay. It is of no consequence that Keir Starmer now leads, or did now lead by that point. We're owed damages seems to have been the thought process that went on with them. The thing is, because Labour were already taking 5 former staffers to court over the leaking of this report, when LAAS launched their own litigation over the leaking of their names, a joint litigation not just between Phillips and Picken, but 7 others from LAAS as well, they also, by default, were taking those 5 former Labour staffers to court as well. Now, in a show of just how weak Labour's case against these 5 is, in relation to 3 of them, the Information Commissioner's Office has already ruled there is insufficient evidence to prosecute them. And in the case of one of the others, Carrie Murphy, Corbyn's former Chief of Staff, Labour were ordered to pay her £90,000 towards her costs as her name got dragged into this LAAS case. They've also had to cough up an additional near £100,000 towards all 5 of those former Labour staffers seeking to have their names struck out from the LAAS case, and more than £100,000 towards the LAAS litigants themselves seeking another anonymity application, even though the very reason they were taking Labour to court was because they'd already been publicly named. As you can see, this has been an insane case, and an insanely costly case, entirely of Starmer's own doing, ultimately. Yet now, after all of this, the LAAS case has mysteriously been dropped. So why? Well, Labour Against Antisemitism are keeping rather stum about it. Rather uncharacteristically for them, they generally like shouting from the rooftops about what action they've been taking. And this news actually came out on the 12th of September. It's gone almost completely unreported. And the only thing the LAAS Twitter page commented on that day was its disgust at former Tory MP Rory Stewart, saying the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn by Labour were disgusting. They themselves feeling it was disgusting Corbyn had not been expelled, par for the course with this group, but no comment at all made then or since about their desire to bankrupt the party being dropped. It doesn't even convey a message along these lines on their own website that makes any mention of this. And I mean, video footage of them bragging about bankrupting Labour was put out by UK Lawyers for Israel, and Novara Media happened to cover this, and they got threatened with legal action if they didn't take the video down from their article, having been threatened with a copyright suit. And that's just after said lawyer's account locked the video, preventing it from being viewed any further. It's all very strange and very suspicious. And given the silence on their part in this case, I would suggest it's likely they didn't have a cat in hell's chance of winning, since they'd waived their own anonymity on such complaints themselves. But equally, there was placation from this on the Labour side too, where they thanked LAAS for everything they do, and even had one of the other litigants standing for them in the local elections earlier this year. They'd actually imposed this person in Brighton and Hove, though thankfully she lost. Having closer ties between the Israel lobbying right-wing group and Labour being enough to close this legal matter is a closeness and a better dialogue kind of put this matter to bed. And is that why it's all been shut down? Have LAAS received some sort of behind closed doors concession from the Labour Party? Will we ever know for sure? Well, the one thing I do know is that even our mainstream journalists have ignored this story, save one article in The Guardian, buried, so even they are keeping quiet by and large. And their silence, their failure to draw attention to this, is in and of itself a political move being committed by the media. Because if we don't know anything, we don't hear this happening, we don't ask questions about it. And we should all be asking, what is the deal here of Keir Starmer's Labour? And what exactly is your relationship with Labour Against Antisemitism now? What do you think's happened? They are basically on the same page when it comes to Israel, this group and Labour. Have they buried the hatchet over it? Is that all it comes down to? Or did LAAS not really have a legal leg to stand on anymore? Do share your thoughts on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily, of course. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation which might add another angle to this story, where back in July it emerged that Keir Starmer has put pro-Israel interests in charge of Labour discipline now. And with the Israel lobby now having a veto on expulsion appeals, that's resulted in a 100% failure rate. Funny that. I'll hopefully see you on the next vid though. Cheers, folks. Right, so Education Secretary Gillian Keegan appears to think she's found quite the gotcha against Labour questioning on crumbling schools by excitedly saying kids prefer the portacabins. But that should be obvious when the alternative is risking being hit on the head by falling concrete in their classrooms. How bad do you think education is these days, Gillian, that you think kids aren't wise to the risks? I'm almost surprised she invested in portacabins at all, actually. I thought she'd make do with telling kids to wear bicycle helmets to lessons or something else equally as stupid. It's also true that it isn't only schools affected by this rack concrete scandal, so if portacabins are so preferable, what next then? Portacabin hospital wards? Portacabin prison cells? Portacabin housing for first-time buyers, perhaps? But if you're selling portacabins as this great win for school kids, I have to wonder which portacabin supplier or manufacturer has the contract for supplying them. Who's making the money out of them then, that you'd be better off using to fix the bloody schools? Well, I've spent a bit of time having a dig into it, as well as Gillian Keegan's ongoing ineptitude, to see what shakes loose, apart from falling masonry. Now, Gillian Keegan, as many of you will be aware, is unfortunately what passes for an education secretary in today's Tory government. Thinks she's doing a great effing job too, and moans that nobody ever tells her how great she is, in fact. But in her most recent farcical comment, she has proudly boasted the kids prefer portacabins, and came in response to Labour questioning from their shadow education spokesperson, Bridget Phillipson, where Keegan answered her by saying, "In terms of the portacabins, I've been to a number of these schools and seen children and met children in the portacabins, and in fact, in the first school I went to, the children were all petitioning me to stay in the portacabin because they actually preferred it to the classroom. So the portacabins are very, very high quality. I would advise the Honourable Lady to go and see some of the high quality portacabins that we have." Well, kids have an innate survival instinct, Gillian. It might surprise you to know they don't want to risk injury or death in order to seek an education. So many schools are in poor condition these days that you have windows nailed shut for safety. They are drafty, mouldy, poorly kept up. They were fabulous spreaders of COVID-19 as well. So many of our school buildings were built quickly, as much of our infrastructure was after the war, on the cheap, as a temporary measure to get the country up and running again, get us going again. RAC fitted the bill at that point, but having concrete that resembles an aero bar isn't going to last. And given successive capitalist governments kept using the stuff right into the 1990s, the failure to invest properly is costing us all dearly now. So sure, the kids love the portacabins, but they shouldn't have to be in portacabins at all. Now, I remember when asbestos removal was a big thing in schools, and that was somewhat a more forgivable issue, I think. The dangers of that stuff, when it was first used, were not known. But RAC was never meant as a long-term solution, and it has been treated as such. And that's on every government that has failed to address the issue going back decades, which has long been known about. Repeated failure to invest in the name of ideological tax cuts, for example, that only disproportionately benefit the rich are to blame in no small part. And at some point, only the rich will be left to tax in order to offset paying for public services, or we will lose them, like these schools and these buildings. This lot, the way Keegan talks, it's like portacabins will be the new norm, as buildings crumble and disappear and the investment is never made to replace them. Or if they are, we'll lose other infrastructure rather than those with all the wealth in this sixth richest country, as we keep being told, wealth the vast majority of us see none of at all, pay their fair share finally and put this country back on its feet. Incidentally, of course, all these portacabins have to come from somewhere and also be paid for. Are we buying them or are we renting them? And how much is that going to cost us? Who's making the money out of that? Well, I had to dig into all of this. At time of writing, there are 174 schools affected by RAC, and apparently some 250 temporary classrooms have been ordered. And having checked out the government's contract supplier page, there's no sign of these contracts on there yet whatsoever to supply. However, I have found one company that has spoken out in the press of being approached by the government to supply them. The imaginatively named Portacabin, spelt with a K, a company based in Europe. The government has said that they're just one company that's been approached, but it's the only one I've found that has been linked to this school's contract. So how much do they charge then? Well, they actually build bespoke modular portacabins, so they can be as big and as dynamic as required, in fact. However, they do also sell used ones, and for a second-hand cabin, standard 12-metre by 4-metre jobby, they sell for £22,000 each. The government wants 250 as things stand for schools, so if they all bought second-hand building site type cabins, as these are, as were supplied to my old school during the asbestos removal days, that in today's money would be £5.5 million. That's bog standard cabins second hand. But Keegan reckons they're very, very high quality, the ones that she's supplying, in which case How much more would they cost? The repair bill for fixing the actual schools is already estimated in the region of £150 million, and you have to realise that if school maintenance costs had been kept up, we wouldn't be facing such a massive lump sum, massive bill all in one go as we are now. And how will the unavoidable cost here be offset? You know they won't be taxing the rich to do that. So how will they do it? Just let inflation rise, or are we going to lose something else, or face a tax rise ourselves? You also have to bear in mind that cost is still rising as more schools with RAC get identified, and also the expenses schools have themselves already spent out making their schools safe and a temporary sticking plaster solution out of their own education budgets, and that will need to be replaced as well. Where are the insurance companies in all of this, you might be asking? Well, weirdly enough, funnily enough, they don't cover RAC, and they won't pay out. It's a short and simple answer. It's inadequate building material. It should have been replaced by now. You also need to bear in mind that with school maintenance having not been kept up with properly for years, there was already a backlog to school repairs. That estimated repair bill currently sits at some £11.4 billion. So all these RAC-induced costs are now being added to that, together with the costs for the portacabins, whatever the actual cost of them might end up being, we still don't know yet. It'll eventually come out once contracts get published, which they inevitably have to be. And it gets even worse still, though. The costs being associated with RAC are based on mitigating repairs for schools. In other words, just fixing the bits of a school affected by RAC. But of course that can range from the odd corner of a classroom to entire schools. And apparently if just a fifth of all the schools built from RAC entirely were demolished and completely replaced, as should have already been done, that in and of itself would cost £250 million too. This is a crisis that is spiralling out of control, and we have an education minister cheering about kids preferring portacabins. It's an absolute madness. This country has suffered from decades of underinvestment, and that doesn't look set to change in the future, but every crumbling building, lost public asset and failing service is a testament to the UK being repeatedly run by idiots only interested in their own ambitions and furthering the prosperity of their own political parties, and not the public and not the services we all rely on. Not even schools for kids to be taught in. What do you reckon, though? Is Keegan right to praise the portacabins, or is she missing the point? Is your local school affected, and how badly? Is this yet another reason for a wealth tax, or are you more concerned about chasing them away if we dare ask very rich people to pay a little bit more? Would you be prepared, in which case, to pay more tax to fix this mess of repeated Tory and Labour government's own making? Let me know in the comments, have your say on this, and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily as ever. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where if Labour aren't even prepared to see our kids adequately fed whilst at school so they can achieve their full potential, what hope is there of them coming in and replacing the Tories and fixing these schools either if they win the next election? Well, I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.